Chapter 2105. When Shinmanting heard this, she quickly looked around and whispered, "Is it expensive here?" "Well, it's not very expensive," Shinluo said. Shinmanting looked down and nodded. "Well, if it's not very expensive, let's come here more often. I love it here. It's so beautiful." "Okay." Shinluo agreed and took a sip of red wine. His eyes were full of tenderness. After dinner, Shinmanting was still in high spirits. She hugged Shinluo's arm and said, "Honey, do you have anything else to do besides work and play with the baby?" What did Shinluo do when there was no one to date or play with? Shinmanting was very curious. He had a lot of time these days. Most of it was to accompany her. If she hadn't known that he was so busy with work today, she would have thought that he had so much time every day. Shinluo looked at her and said with a smile, "When you're not awake, I take the baby to see you and sleep. That's all I do every day." In the past 2 years, he had fallen into self-reproach and depression for nearly a year. During that time, he had thought of committing suicide several times to atone for his sins. However, Little Moon was still young. Finally, under Sean Julia's guidance and treatment, he slowly improved. However, he was still immersed in work. Work, hospital, home. Every day, he repeated the same days. He was like a soulless puppet, a walking corpse. Fortunately, she woke up. He had fantasized countless times. If she woke up, what kind of hatred would he face from her? How would she blame him? But there was nothing. She had forgotten everything. It was as if all his sins had never happened. Very good. However, now facing the 12-year-old Shinmanting, Shinluo felt more and more uneasy. It was unknown whether she would wake up, and when she would wake up. If she woke up one day, what kind of situation would he face? He didn't dare to think about it. Looking at Shinmanting's incredulous eyes, which seemed to have expected it, his heart softened slightly. He reached out and held her in his arms. He whispered, "I only feel alive when you wake up." Shinmanting was caught off guard by his sudden confession, and her heart ached slightly. She hugged him tightly and didn't make a sound. Shinluo closed his eyes and whispered, "Promise me one thing." "Okay," Shinmanting replied in a low voice. "Honey, I'll agree to anything you say." Shinluo's heart softened, but at the same time, he felt a dull pain. "Manting, promise me that no matter what happens, you won't leave me, okay?" Shinmanting felt a little baffled, but when she heard his words, she nodded and said, "I promise you, hubby, I won't leave you." "Then remember it." "I'll remember." "Swear it." "I swear." Shinluo held her in his arms. He was well aware of the current situation. Everything was too easy. Nothing was going to turn out the way he imagined. Once she sobered up, she would still hate him. Shinluo felt a little scared. All the happiness she had today was about to become a bunch of bubbles. When she woke up, it would all disappear without a trace. Manting, I truly love you. Chapter 2106. Me too. I love it so much. Her innocent words echoed in Shinluo's heart. It was already very late when they got home. Little Moon was still sleeping in his grandparents' room that night. The two of them tiptoed into the room. Shinmanting was so tired that she lay on the bed. Shinluo smiled when he saw her like that. "You're lying down so soon. You haven't showered yet." No. Shinmanting covered herself with a quilt. "I'm exhausted. I just want to sleep." "You're sleeping so early." Shinluo went up and pressed her down. "I want to discuss something with you." "Discuss?" Shinmanting looked up at him. "What is it?" "You don't have to discuss it with me." "Well, this is between the two of us. I can only make a decision after you agree." "What?" Shinmanting couldn't help but ask curiously. "Haven't you always been the one to do whatever you want?" "I've never had any objections." Shinluo was a little restless when he heard her obedient words. He pressed down on her and gently hugged her. He whispered, "Then let's have a wedding and invite all our relatives and friends to the banquet." "Okay." Shinmanting didn't hesitate. "After the wedding, we'll go on a honeymoon." "Okay." Then, Shinluo paused and seemed to be hesitating. He gently leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Let's have another child." Shinmanting couldn't help but shrink back when she felt his warm breath on her ear. She subconsciously said, "Okay, huh?" Shenmanting seemed to have realized something. She turned to look at him and said bitterly, "Don't. I heard that giving birth is very painful." Shenluo and looked at her and smiled. He gently sucked her plump earlobes. Shenmanting was caught off guard. She felt unbearably itchy. She shrank back and said, "Go away." Shenluo and didn't listen to her. He hugged her tightly and slowly moved his lips downwards. They turned into dense kisses on her neck. Yi Qianqian had a dream. In her dream, a cute and adorable child crawled towards her with his bare buttocks. The child's features were exactly the same as Shunjilia's. "Mom!" His childish voice sounded childish as he reached out to grab her. Yi Qianqian reached out to him in an attempt to hug him, but the little figure, who was as delicate as jade, was like a bubble. The moment she touched him, he disappeared without a trace. Darkness, it was still darkness. Shunjulia was by her bedside. He was leaning against the wall and taking a nap. But not long after he fell asleep, he was woken up by a soft sob. With a start, Shunjulia woke up from his dreams. His gaze fell on Yi Qianqian, who was lying on the bed. "No!" Yi Qianqian's hands were stretched out as if she was dreaming of something extremely sad. Her hands were flailing, and tears were streaming down her face. Shunjulia's heart ached. He held her hand with both hands and said softly, "Wife, Qianqian, baby." Yi Qianqian's voice was choked with sobs. She felt as if her heart was being choked with sadness. Shunjulia's heart ached even more, and a silent sourness rose from the bottom of his heart to his eyes. He leaned over and gently hugged her. I'm here. Don't cry, my wife." Yi Qianqian subconsciously hugged him. The next moment, she opened her eyes. She was surrounded by darkness. In front of her was an aura that was so familiar to her bones. Chapter 2107. It was a dream. What a realistic dream. She seemed to really feel that the baby was leaving her. Yi Qianqian gently hugged him and wanted to speak, but she found that her throat was choking. She couldn't say a word. Shunjulia gently raised his eyes and kissed away her tears gently and delicately. Yi Qianqian broke down and cried bitterly. "Be good." Shunjulia felt as if his heart was being dismembered. "It's okay. He'll come back sooner or later." Old Shun. Yi Qianqian hugged him tightly. She was devastated. I'm sorry. What are you talking about?" Shunjulia looked a little angry. "It's not your fault. It's me. If I had stayed by your side, nothing would have happened. You can hit me." "Qianqian, don't cry." Shunjulia couldn't hold it in anymore. His voice was choked with sobs. "I beg you, don't cry. This is the most important period for a woman. If you hurt your eyes from crying, how am I going to live in the future?" A woman had to go through confinement after a miscarriage. During this period, it was the easiest for her to get sick. Just think of it as doing it for me, okay? Shunjulia hugged her and pleaded. "You have to be strong for the sake of our next child. What if you get cataracts and glaucoma from crying and pass it on to the child?" Yi Qianqian was crying properly. When she suddenly heard his words, she burst out laughing. He shoved him away, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he shouted, "Get lost." Shunjulia laughed and continued. "That's right. Taking care of your body is more important than anything else." Yi Qianqian couldn't cry anymore after hearing his words. She wiped her eyes and sobbed as she looked at him. Shunjulia also restrained his emotions and asked, "Are you hungry?" "Yes." "Then I'll go buy some supper. Wait for me for a while." "Don't go." Yi Qianqian looked at him and couldn't help crying again. "Did you tell my sister?" Shunjulia nodded. "She came to see you in the afternoon and sat here for more than an hour. She left when she saw that you didn't wake up." "What time is it now?" "Well," Shunjulia glanced at his watch. 9:30 p.m. "Then ask you to come over and buy some supper on the way." Yi Qianqian wiped her eyes and sniffed. "Ask her if Jianlin is asleep. If he isn't, bring him over." When Shunjulia heard that, he said, "Jianlin is still young. A 2-year-old child should be asleep at this time. Let her bring him over tomorrow. I'll make a call first." "Yes." Shunjulia dialed Yi Yu's number right in front of Yi Qianqian. However, it took a while before the call was picked up. The person who answered the phone wasn't Yi Yu. It was Li Jinan. Brother-in-law. Li Jinan called out in a flat voice. Is sister-in-law awake? Yeah, Shun Julia replied. If you and Yu have time, come over. Qian wants to see your son. All right, wait for us. We'll go now. Li Jinan had always been straightforward with his words. Sister-in-law just woke up. Yes, then I'll bring some food along. It's better to cook some porridge at this time. Is porridge okay? Sure. Okay. I'm hanging up. Shun Julia was speechless. Was it Jinan? Yi Qian could tell from the expression on Shun Julia's face. Chapter 2108. That's a good man. Yi Qian felt a little relieved. He's better than your brother. Look at what happened to Yu when she married your brother. Now that Sister Manting is married to my brother, isn't that good? It's not good. Look at Manting now. I always feel like he's molesting a child. Shun Julia looked at her and tried to defend Shen Luo. Like a fish drinking water, when it's hot or cold. Yi Qian glanced at him and changed the topic. Help me up. I need to go to the bathroom. Shun Julia smiled helplessly. Yes, madam. By the time Li Jinan and Yi Yu arrived, it was already an hour later. In his hand was a big clay pot, hanging from a steel hook. The two of them walked in holding the 2-year-old Li Jianlin. The little guy had been fed until he was chubby. When he walked in, he looked around with his dark eyes. When he saw Shun Julia, he looked up calmly. Shun Julia raised his eyebrows slightly and said, How long has it been? You've grown quite a bit. Li Jianlin looked at him without blinking. Call me uncle. Li Jinan put the clay pot on the table and nudged the child. Li Jianlin appeared overly calm and obediently called out, Uncle. His voice was neither loud nor soft, and he sounded serious. Shun Julia was speechless. He turned to look at Yi Qian and asked, Is Little Moon the only child of his age who develops slowly? Yi Qian replied, Perhaps it's because Little Moon doesn't have a mother to teach him. That was the only explanation. Yi Yu walked over to Yi Qian and looked at her pale face. She felt a little heartache and said, I waited here for you in the afternoon, but I didn't wake up, so I left first. Yi Qian looked at Yi Yu's increasingly rosy and rounder face and said enviously, Your days are getting better and better. Jianlin is very sensible, isn't he? It's hard to explain in a few words, just like his father. Yi Yu sighed softly. You must be hungry. I'll wipe your body after dinner. By the way, Dad really wants to know what happened to you. He called me and said that my brother-in-law was fooling him. I don't know what to say. Give Dad a call later, Yi Yu said as she looked at Shun Julia. Explain it to Dad. Okay, tomorrow. Shun Julia scooped porridge for everyone and handed a bowl to Jianlin. Jianlin reached out and took it. Thank you, Uncle. But very quickly, she carried the bowl to the bedside and said, Mom. She glanced at Yi Qian, who was standing behind Yi Yu, and gestured to her. She opened her mouth as if she didn't know what to say, but the look on her face had conveyed everything. Yi Yu took it and whispered, Is this for Auntie? Yeah. Jianlin nodded. For little Auntie. Yi Yu took it and smiled. All right. Thank you, Jianlin. Thank you, Jianlin. Yi Qian looked at him. Her eyes were full of envy, and her heart ached. She quickly averted her eyes and looked at Shun Julia. Old Shun, feed me. Let me do it. Yi Yu moved his stool over and sat down. Brother-in-law has been staying here all day. He must be hungry. I'm fine. Shun Julia walked over. I ate something tonight. I'm still full. He took the bowl from Yi Yu's hand. What did you call me? Hubby. Chapter 2109. Although Yi Qian's body wasn't feeling well, she was still in good spirits after sleeping for so long. After finishing 2 bowls in one go, he was in high spirits and started chatting with Yi Yu. Li Jianlin was still young, so he was already sleepy. Li Jinan held his son in his arms. The little guy fell asleep, and Shun Julia chatted with Li Jinan from time to time. They chatted until 11:30 p.m. before Yi Qian remembered to ask them to go back. She was reluctant to leave, but she still asked Yi Yu to take the child back to sleep. Yi Qian looked at the child in Li Jinan's arms and couldn't help but take a second look. How blissful! A family of 3. Yi Qianqian sighed. Yu Yu's life is getting better and better. What are you envious of? We could do it too. Shinjulia tidied up the food. Do you want some more? There's still some left. Yeah, feed me. By the time Yi Qianqian was discharged from the hospital, it was already a week later. When she returned to the capital, the whole family gathered around her and asked, "Are you all right? How did you end up in the hospital for so long after a fall?" That's right. Grandma was so worried. Old Mrs. Shin looked her up and down. "Oh my, your little face has lost a lot of weight." "Oh my," Shen Longyue said, "since you're back, stay at home for a while. Get Nanny he to make you some nourishing soup. You don't look too well." "Yeah." Mrs. Shun held Yi Qianqian's hand. "You have to nourish yourself during this period. Your grandmother did a divination for you and Jilia yesterday. She said that you might get pregnant this year." When Yi Qianqian heard that, her heart ached. Yes, it was indeed possible to get pregnant this year. Moreover, she was already pregnant. But she had lost it because of her own carelessness. At that thought, Yi Qianqian felt an inexplicable heat that stung her eyes. When Shun Julia heard that, he hurried forward and said, all right. Qianqian just came back, and she's not feeling well. Why are you all crowding around her and asking her questions? Come. Dear, come with me to my room to rest." As he spoke, Yi Qianqian was pulled away by Shun Julia. When the family saw this scene, they were all a little surprised. Old Mrs. Shun vaguely sensed that something was amiss and said, "I have a feeling that Julia is lying to us." "What do you mean by being hospitalized for a fall? His limbs are still fine. How could he be hospitalized for a week after a fall?" Mrs. Shun had been suspicious for a long time, but she could not figure out why. Was it a fall, or an illness, or something else? No one gave them an answer. From beginning to end, Shun Juliet and Yi Qianqian avoided talking about it. When Shun Luo and Shun Manting returned home with the baby, they were surprised to see the 3 elders of the family sitting in the living room. Little Moon, who was being carried by Shun Luo, and struggled to get up when he saw the scene. Then, she ran over and hugged Mrs. Shun's knees, shouting, "Grandma!" Madame Shun stroked his furry little head and said, "Good boy." Then, she hugged Shen Longyue's thigh. "Grandpa!" Shen Longyue picked him up and said, "In the future, you have to call me great-grandmother first when you enter the house. Do you understand?" "Oh." Shen Yuexiao nodded and looked at old Mrs. Shun. He smiled and said, "Great-grandma." Chapter 21:10. Shen Yuexiao climbed down from Shen Longyue's knee and ran toward old Mrs. Shun. "The merry-go-round!" he exclaimed. Shen Manting saw her son's excited expression. She went up to him and said, "We went to the amusement park and took him on the merry-go-round. Little Moon must be happy, right?" Little Moon's pale face was flushed. He nodded and said, "Yes, I'm happy." He pinched the baby's face and said, "Dad, Mom, Grandma, I'll go in first." "Go ahead," old Mrs. Shun said with a smile. "Oh, look at your little face. You're such a good grandson. Come, look at the toys your uncle brought back for you." Old Mrs. Shun carried the little boy into the toy room and opened the box of toys Shun Julia had brought back. "Come, do you know how to play with building blocks?" "Yes." Shen Yuexiao's eyes lit up as he looked at the colorful building blocks in front of him. Shen Luoan walked in and said, "Grandma, I'll play with Little Moon. You should go and rest first." "Why should I rest? I'm just playing a game with my great-grandson. Why are you interfering? Go away. Don't stay here and join the fun." Shen Luo and was chased away mercilessly. He chuckled and said helplessly, "All right then. Call me later if you need anything. Go away." Old Mrs. Shun ignored Shen Luo and continued to dismantle the building blocks for her grandson. "Do you like this?" "Yes." Shen Luo and watched for a while and returned to the room. Shin Manting sat on the bed and held the little thing she had bought that day in her hand. When she saw Shen Luo come in, she smiled and said, "Honey, I want to keep this thing as a souvenir." She stood up as she spoke. She walked to the drawer and pulled it out, revealing a dazzling array of little things inside. They were all little things they had bought when they went out to play. There were small necklaces, key rings, and those little dolls and toys. She carefully put down the tassel pendant in her hand and said, "When we're old, we'll be very happy to see all the places we used to go together. Shenluo, Anne's heart softened when he heard this. He gently hugged her waist from behind and whispered, "Where did you learn this?" Shin Manting blushed slightly and asked, "What do you think? Don't you like it?" "I like it." Shenluo and kissed her ear. "I like it so much. It's so romantic." It was so romantic that Shenluo and couldn't even be sure that Shin Manting had prepared this for their happiness. Shin Manting looked at the colorful little things in front of her and smiled contentedly. She said, "Then I'll make more in the future. Every time I see these things, I feel so happy." "Yes, I'm so happy." Shenluo smiled, but his heart was sad. It was precisely because he was too happy that he felt as if he had stolen all of this. Shenluo was combing Shin Manting's hair in the room. They talked and did some boring things in the house. Even the two of them didn't know what they were doing. Time passed quickly. Knock, knock. Someone knocked on the door. It was a little anxious and a little excited. "Brother, come out quickly and see what your son has done." When Shenluo heard this, he stood up and opened the door. Chapter 2111. Shenluo leaned over to take a look. It was just a simple 9-grid puzzle. It was very simple, but for a 2-year-old child, it was not easy at all. Shenluo glanced at it and asked, "Little Moon did it himself?" "Yes." Shenjulia was a little excited. He looked at him and said, "I just bought it. I just took out a 9-grid puzzle for him. Now the little boy is playing with a 16-grid puzzle. Let's go and have a look." Shenluo was a little excited when he heard that. He followed Shenjulia to Little Moon's toy room and saw the little boy lying on the ground playing with a puzzle. When he saw Shenjulia and Shenluo walk in, he looked up at them and laughed. "Daddy, Uncle, what are you playing?" Shenluo walked over and squatted down beside him to look at him. Little Moon looked at him and pointed at the puzzle. "Uncle," he said obediently, "did I give it to you?" Shenluo patted his head. "Do you like it?" "Yes, I like it." Little Moon smiled. Shenluo looked over and found that Little Moon had almost completed the puzzle. The 4 corners were rounded, and the 4 corners had been put together. "Are you done?" Shenluo asked. Shin Yuexiao looked at the puzzle in front of him and reached out with the puzzle in his hand. He shook his head and said no. Then he put the puzzle in his hand under the puzzle on the ground. Shenjulia and Shenluo looked at it quietly and soon found that the edges had also been filled in. They found that it was completely accurate and there were no mistakes. He placed the last one down. It was a picture of Grey Wolf. It was very complete and there were no mistakes. Shenluo looked as if he had expected it, but Shenjulia laughed and said, "Brother, look at this." Shenjulia pointed to a corner of the room. It was a small house made of Lego. It was very tall and beautiful. "I just bought all these today. Look at how well he did." When Shenjulia said this, he looked a little proud and said, "I told you that my little nephew can't be more stupid than others." "Who said that Little Moon is stupid?" Shenluo raised his eyebrows. "He's always been very smart. He remembers a lot of things once I tell him. You don't play with him often, and you don't even care about your nephew. How dare you say such things?" Shenjulia felt a little awkward. He coughed lightly and said, "I just realized that the children of other families are quite smart. Look at Oming's daughter. She's only 1 year younger than Little Moon, but she already knows how to go to the bathroom by herself. She's also very articulate and quick-witted. Girls speak faster and their brains develop faster, but that's all. Little Moon's IQ is much higher than his peers," Gunyinshin said. "Yeah, my sister-in-law's son is pretty smart too. He's Li Jinnan's son." You speak very smoothly and your pronunciation is very accurate. Can you spin the Rubik's Cube?" How would I know? Little Moon already knows how to do that. He can even assemble his own toys." Shenluo seemed to be showing off. "This child takes after me. He doesn't like to talk, but his brain works faster than yours." Shenjulia asked, "Is there a personal attack?" Chapter 2112. Yes. Shenjulia was speechless. He looked at him and asked, "How are things between you and Sister Manting recently?" "Call me sister-in-law." Shenluo looked at him and stood up. He said softly, "Come out with me for a while." Shenjulia noticed that Shenluo Anne's expression seemed to be more serious than before. Shenluo and quickly walked out of the door and into the courtyard. Julia. Yes. She seems to be growing up slowly. When she first woke up, she was 12 years old. Now she's grown up, but now she's becoming more and more independent. Shenluo and reached into his pocket and took out a pack of cigarettes. He took one out and put it in his mouth, but he didn't light it. He looked at him and said, "Moreover, she's been having more and more nightmares recently." "What kind of nightmares?" "She's dreaming of the past." Shenluo and looked at Shun Julia with a sad gaze. "She's dreaming of all kinds of things in the past. Last night, she seemed to have dreamed of the time you took her out to play. She was calling your name. Do you know what she said?" "What?" Shun Julia asked. "Well, I took her out to play." "Yes." She said, "Julia, don't burn it. You can't eat it later. It's all yours." Shenluo, Anne's voice was a little low. He looked at Shun Julia and pursed his lips. "It happened that year. Do you remember? 3 or 4 years ago, when Yi was still at home." Shenluo and finally took out a lighter from his pocket. After lighting it, he said softly, "It happened so long ago, and it was such a trivial matter. How could she still remember it? I've forgotten it." Shenjulia was silent. He stared at Shenluo and found that there was a smile on his face. But in his eyes, there was a clear sense of loneliness and a touch of fear. It was hidden deep within and difficult to detect. Shenjulia sighed softly and considered his words before saying, "Brother, yes. Sister Manting has selective amnesia, and she's slowly recovering now. According to what you've described, she usually looks normal, but she dreams every night. Sooner or later, her memory will slowly recover in the form of dreams," Shenjulia said. She paused for a moment and looked at Shenluo, who was looking at her seriously. She said slowly, "The reason why she still remembers that kind of thing is perhaps because it's a trivial matter to you, but to her, it's a very precious or very happy memory. That's why it appeared in her dreams." Shenjulia's words were very light, but every word was like a blunt knife, forcefully stabbing into his heart. Shenluo and averted his eyes and looked at the lush roses in the courtyard. It was not the flowering season yet, but the branches and leaves were already very lush. He took a long drag on his cigarette, but for some reason, he felt a lump in his throat and choked on the cigarette. He couldn't help but start coughing violently. He choked hard and heavily, and his throat was in severe pain. Unknowingly, she choked on her tears. Perhaps it was because the smoke was too thick, and when it reached her eyes, it became even more uncontrollable. Shenjulia fell silent and looked at her quietly. After coughing for a long time, Shenluo wiped his eyes. His voice was terrifyingly hoarse as he asked, "Is there any way to keep Manting at this stage?" Chapter 21:13. Perhaps it was a selfish idea, but perhaps it was the best idea Shenluo could come up with. As long as she couldn't remember, as long as she retained her memories, then everyone could live happily ever after, couldn't they? When Shenjulia heard Shenluo, Anne's words, he turned to look at him and frowned. "Brother, are you crazy? This is very unfair to Sister Manting." When Shenluo heard this, he took another drag of his cigarette and exhaled. He turned to look at Shenjulia's face. Shenjulia frowned as if he couldn't understand him. He continued, "Manting's mental state is that of 12-year-old. What you're doing is no different from child molestation or child abduction." Shenluo suddenly laughed. He looked at Shenjulia and said, "Manting is the mother of my child. I just want her to continue living happily." As he spoke, he looked at the lush foliage in front of him and said softly, "Moreover, how do you know if Manting is willing to regain her memories? Perhaps she prefers her current life, just like me. They spent every day carefree together. They laughed when they were happy and acted coquettishly when they were unhappy. They lived like a real married couple. Their recent life was the blissful life that he had always dreamed of. He believed that Manting felt the same way." Shenjulia didn't say anything. He looked at Shenluo and sighed deeply as if he had thought of something. Shenluo looked at Shenjulia and walked up to him. He gently patted him on the shoulder and said softly, "Forget it. Don't force yourself." When Shen Luo finished speaking, he walked up the steps and turned to go back. "Brother," Shenjia stopped him and said calmly, "why don't we think of a way to help Sister Manting regain her memories as soon as possible?" Shen Luo paused for a moment and suddenly laughed. He looked at him coldly and said, "Julia, you're the crazy one." His tone was a little unfriendly. He looked at Shun Julia in front of him, and his gaze was no longer the same as before. Shun Julia clearly sensed his displeasure and didn't say another word. Shen Luo then quickly retracted his gaze and turned to go back in. Shen Yuexiao was alone in the room, holding a Rubik's Cube in his hand. When she saw Shen Luo enter the door, she immediately got up from the ground and went forward, shouting, "Daddy!" Shen Luo's thigh was being hugged by Xiao Yu. When he saw Xiao Yu's little face, his originally cold and displeased expression softened a little. He squatted down, picked up the baby, and walked into the room. Shen Manting was just about to take a shower when she saw Shen Luo come in with their son in his arms. She leaned forward and kissed the baby. "You haven't taken a shower yet, have you?" "Not yet," Shen Luo said in a low voice. Shen Manting could smell the tobacco in his mouth. Feeling a little uncomfortable, she frowned and said, "Hubby, you smoked." "Yeah." Shen Luo looked at her and asked, "You don't like it?" I think it stinks. The baby won't like it, right?" Shen Manting looked at the infant and smiled. "Hubby, let's give the infant a bath first. It's so late now. Let's let the infant sleep after bathing." Chapter 21:14. Of course I'm happy. Shen Manting reached out and took the infant into her arms without hesitation. Shen Manting spoke without hesitation. Shen Luo was silent for a moment. Shen Manting didn't seem to notice Shen Luo strange behavior and asked, "What's wrong?" Shen Luo looked at her and moved his lips, but he quickly held back his words. Shen Manting felt a little strange and asked, "Honey, what's wrong with you today?" Shen Luo looked at her and thought for a while before he asked with difficulty, "Do you want to regain your previous memories?" Shen Luo's voice was a little low. He seemed to have thought about it for a long time. Shen Manting felt a little strange and subconsciously looked up at Shen Luo's expression. At that moment, Shen Luo seemed to be expressionless, but vaguely, it seemed that there was an indescribable message in his eyes. Shen Manting couldn't fully grasp such a message. However, she could feel his hesitation. She thought about it and replied, "I think it's better for me to regain my memories. After all, we used to be husband and wife. I don't even know what my life was like before. If I regain my memories, will my life be a little more complete? What do you think, honey?" "Yes." Shen Luo silently agreed. "I feel that I'm missing a lot of memories in my life. From 12 years old to 31 years old, this change is too sudden." Shen Manting pouted. She held the infant in her arms and looked for clothes for him. She rummaged through the wardrobe and said, "It's been 19 years. A lot of things must have happened in these 19 years. If I don't know anything, I'll feel like I'm feeling now. I'll feel empty in my heart." Shen Manting busied herself in front of the wardrobe and didn't look back. Shen Luo looked at her back and listened to her words. He felt a little sad in his heart. What if all you remember are unhappy things? Shen Luo's voice was a little hoarse as he slowly walked forward. If the things that you're about to remember bring you only unhappiness and pain, would you still be willing to remember them? How could that be? Shen Manting smiled and said, "Those are also my memories. Even if they are painful and unhappy, these memories are still mine. If they are not, then they are incomplete. For example, I feel that I am still 12 years old, but you tell me that I am already 31 years old. Although I am very happy now, sometimes I still feel that I am very childish. I don't like this feeling." Just like now, although she was holding her own son in her arms, she knew that she had given birth to this child, but she still didn't have the awareness of being a mother. Apart from the fact that the child was calling her mother, she didn't think there was any difference. If she left now, there wouldn't be any mother's love that couldn't be severed like what the TV show said. Moreover, from the age of 12 to the age of 31, there are 19 years. During these 19 years, there must be a lot of things happening. Some are unhappy, and some are happy. Why don't I recover my memory? Shinmanting had already found clothes. She held the child's clothes and turned around, only to find that Shin Luo and was looking at her deeply. She couldn't tell what kind of expression was in his eyes. Chapter 21:15. Shinmanting felt that Shun Luo An's behavior was a little strange. She said coquettishly, "Come and hug our son. My arms are sore." Shin Luo and walked forward and gently hugged her and his son. His action was a little sudden, and Shinmanting could sense that he was a little sad. Shin Yuexiao also reached out to hug Shin Luo and called out, "Daddy." Shin Luo and nodded and closed his eyes. "Little Moon, do you love your mother?" "I love Mommy. I love Daddy." Shin Yuexiao shouted. "Daddy, Mommy, Little Moon loves you." The latter part of her sentence was a little soft, as if she was afraid that she would say something wrong. She was a little timid and careful. Shin Luo and smiled silently, but his eyes were filled with bitterness. "Then let Daddy and Mommy take you to take a bath." "Yes." Shin Yuexiao answered loudly. Shin Luo and carried the baby over to her. "Did you have fun today?" "I'm happy." Shin Yuexiao had a smile on his face. He looked at Shin Luo and said, "The wooden horse is fun. Then I'll take you there often." And the night was deep. Shin Luo and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Shinmanting was sleeping beside him. She gently leaned over and hugged him. "Hubby, are you in a bad mood tonight?" she asked softly. Every night, Shin Luo and would pester her, push her down, and then pin her under his body. What was going on today? Shinmanting could sense that he was feeling down, so she hugged him tighter. Shin Luo and pressed her hand down, turned around, and kissed her lightly on the lips. "Do you like being with me?" "I like it." She leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. "Don't you like me anymore, hubby?" "Why would I?" Shin Luo An's voice was low and hoarse. "I like it very much. I've always liked it." "Yes," Shinmanting replied. Her face was a little hot. "Hubby, my waist is so sore. Can you massage it for me?" Without waiting for Shin Luo An's reply, she reached out and pulled his hand to hers. He placed his palm flat on the back of his waist and said, "Rub." Shin Luo and switched from being passive to being active. He pressed down on her with a moderate amount of force. Shinmanting felt very comfortable. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his lips. During this period of time, she had learned everything she should and shouldn't know. Under Shin Luo An's guidance, she felt a little addicted to it. Her slender legs separated his legs and squeezed herself in. Then, she gave him a long and deep kiss. Shin Luo and remained passive, which made Shinmanting feel a little frustrated. She quickly broke away from him and said, "Hubby, aren't you coming today? Do you like it?" Shin Luo and suddenly asked, "Do you really like this kind of thing?" Shinmanting's face was flushed from a kiss. She looked at him, and her eyes were particularly bright in the night. Shin Luo An's throat tightened. In an instant, he pressed her down and gave her a deep, lingering kiss. His hand moved from the back of her waist all the way down. Without much foreplay, it could even be said to be a little rushed. Shin Luo and tore off the cloth beneath her and entered her. Shinmanting groaned. She felt a little uncomfortable and said, "Hubby." Shin Luo An's lips fell densely on her upper body, igniting clusters of flames. Chapter 21:16. Shin Luo and asked again, "Do you like it?" Shinmanting felt that Shin Luo and was a little strange today. It was not only because of what he said at night, but also because of his abnormal behavior tonight. Even if he did not always take the initiative to ask for it, he would never be in a completely passive state like today. Shinmanting panted slightly and did not speak when she heard this. Shin Luo and suddenly became heavy, and Shinmanting could not help but let out a moan. Manting, Shin Luo and leaned over to her ear and whispered, "Do you like it? Tell me, do you like it?" Shinmanting pinched his arm with both hands. Honey, Shin Luo An's movements became heavier and faster. Manting could not avoid his ferocious attacks at all. Finally, under his questioning, she finally gasped and said, "I like it, what?" Luoan approached and said in a low voice, "I didn't hear you clearly." "I like it, so, like it, Slow down. Luoan could not help but kiss her lips. In the last moment of madness, he reached the clouds with her. After it was over, Luoan got up and reached for the bedside table to find a pack of cigarettes. Manting was wrapped in the quilt. When she saw Luoan pick up the pack of cigarettes, she asked, "Honey, are you smoking again? If you don't like it, I won't smoke." Luoan took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth. Manting looked at him with a pair of straight eyes and said softly, "I don't like it." Luoan looked at her sideways. He did not light the cigarette. He just took 2 puffs of the cigarette and then took it away. "Is the smell very strong?" Manting still looked at him and reached out to hold his hand. Luoan followed her hand and pinched the cigarette. He broke it and threw it away. The dean used to have a father, but he smoked too much and his lungs were black. The hospital couldn't cure him, so he died. Manting looked at him and said, "I think the dean's father died a little unjustly. He was quite a good man, but he died because of smoking. You should also stop smoking." Luoan smiled and said, "I won't smoke to death." The dean's father said the same thing, but he still died in the end. Manting looked at him. "Don't smoke anymore." As she spoke, she frowned and said, "Hubby, my waist is getting more and more sore. Help me massage it." "Again?" Luoan raised his eyebrows and put the pack of cigarettes away. Then he lay down and reached out to touch the back of her waist. "I don't want to come. I'm not feeling well today." Manting was very honest. She frowned and then said, "Hubby, did I play too long today? The roller coaster was a little dangerous. Did I hurt my waist? Get up. Let me take a look." Luoan lifted the blanket and asked her to turn away. Suddenly, Manting exclaimed, "Ah, hubby." Manting jumped up from the bed and stared in disbelief at the bed she had just been lying on. "Hubby, there's blood." Luoan followed her gaze and saw a patch of dark red at first glance. Startled, she lifted the blanket. He discovered that it wasn't just a patch of red. There were also scattered patches of water, stains mixed with red blood. It looked a little scary. "Hubby." Manting covered her mouth with an obvious look of fear on her face. "What should I do? I'm bleeding. You poked me, and I'm bleeding." Chapter 21:17. Luoan was stunned at first, but when he heard Manting's words, he laughed out loud. Manting's little face was full of fear. Looking at Luoan, who was laughing mercilessly in front of her, Manting was annoyed. She pounced on him and shouted angrily, "Honey." Luoan couldn't help it. He held her with both hands and leaned back. However, this kind of laughter was getting louder and louder, and Manting felt a little despised. Her cheeks were red from laughing, and she pressed her whole body on Luoan and said angrily, "Stop laughing. What are you laughing at?" Her eyes unconsciously turned red, and Manting gritted her teeth angrily. She sat down heavily on his body and shouted, "Don't laugh anymore, don't laugh anymore." Her voice was anxious and annoyed, and there was a hint of anger. As she spoke, she clenched her hands into fists and hit him. Luoan caught her hands and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Then he said, "You." When he was about to speak, his eyes saw the appearance of Manting in front of him. He suddenly couldn't help laughing out loud. Manting was about to cry. Seeing Luoan, unlike this, she was extremely angry and pouted with red eyes. "Stop laughing." Okay. Luoan immediately became serious and held her. "I won't laugh anymore." Manting looked at him and pouted. "What should I do? You poked me and made me bleed. Now I feel pain in my stomach, and it's still bleeding. What should I do?" Luoan finally stopped laughing, but he suddenly couldn't help laughing again. But when he saw Manting was about to cry, he immediately restrained the smile on his face and said, "It's okay. It's okay. It's okay." Then he helped her up and glanced at his waist and abdomen. The place where she had just sat was already a bloody red. Shin Manting saw this and felt even more helpless. She said, "My stomach hurts." "It's okay." Shin Luo saw her fear and said softly, "Come on, get up first. Let's go take a shower together." "Okay." Shin Manting got up and was then led into the bathroom by Shin Luo and took a quick shower. After casually washing up, he told Shin Manting that he was going to take a shower. When he returned, he was holding a bag of something dark blue in his hand. Shin Manting thought it looked familiar and asked, "What is this?" "Sanitary napkin." Shin Luo handed her a towel. "Hurry up and wipe yourself clean. Put on your clothes. I'll teach you how to use it." "Oh." Shin Manting watched him unwrap the package and couldn't help but ask, "Is this the thing that Mom put in our cabinet a few days ago?" "That's right." Shin Luo sighed in his heart. Mother is more considerate. She even thought of this aspect. It's come in handy so quickly. What is this aspect? A woman's normal physiological detoxification occurs once a month, Shin Luo explained to her. Every woman has a few days like this. You'll be fine once you use this. "Oh." Shin Manting was a little curious, but she quickly put on her clothes. Shin Luo unwrapped one and taught her how to use it. The operation was very simple, and Shin Manting quickly mastered it. Chapter 21:18. Shin Manting looked at his meaningful expression and said weakly, "Honey, I seem to be bleeding again." "This thing doesn't seem to be able to stop the bleeding." Shin Luo couldn't help laughing. "This thing doesn't stop the bleeding. It just absorbs your blood after it flows out. Don't be afraid. You'll be fine in a few days." Shin Manting didn't quite understand. She looked at Shin Luo in front of her and said softly, "Is this what a normal woman should have? Why haven't I seen it before?" Although she didn't remember much, she had never heard of such a situation. Recently, Shin Luo has been a little strange. Could it be that he had planned to make her bleed for a long time? Or perhaps there was something on her husband's penis that would hurt her. That was why he was acting so strange tonight. Later, he couldn't help but have sex with her. The more Shin Manting thought about it, the more panicked she became. She looked at Shin Luo in front of her and said sadly, "Honey, you don't have to consider my feelings. Just tell me directly. Did you hurt me? Are you afraid that I'll hate you? So you lied?" Shin Luo laughed out loud and helplessly pressed her into his arms. He whispered, "No, what I said is true. Don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of." Shin Manting looked at him and mumbled, "Why don't I believe you? It's true." Shin Luo pulled her out. "Come here. I'll explain it to you." When I walked out, the two of them immediately saw the dark red blood stain on the bedsheet. Shin Luo looked at the mess and said helplessly, "Come on, give me a hand. Let's change the bedsheets first." Shin Manting was very obedient. She responded and whispered, "Okay." Shin Luo quickly took out the bedsheets and removed the dirty ones. He said, "This is called menstruation for women. If they don't have menstruation, they can't have children." "Oh, I see." Shin Manting nodded, but soon asked, "Why didn't I have it before?" "Because you're still young." Shin Luo looked at her. "Most women have their first period between the ages of 13 and 15. That's usually the case. When you were 12, I'm afraid you hadn't even had your first period yet." "Oh, I see." Shin Manting nodded. "Did I experience it when I was sleeping in the hospital? Isn't it disgusting to dirty the bed every day?" "It won't happen. When you were in the hospital, you didn't have enough food and nutrition. It was difficult for your body to metabolize food, so you didn't have this kind of thing." Shin Luo put the dirty bedsheets into the basket. Shin Manting blinked and asked, "Honey, I'm on my period now. Will I have a baby?" Shin Manting sounded doubtful, and she looked a little puzzled. Shin Luo paused when he heard this question. Then, he turned around and glanced at Shin Manting. When Shin Manting met his gaze, she looked at him and said, "I heard that giving birth is very painful. Honey, can I not have a child?" When Shin Luo heard this, an idea suddenly sprouted in his mind. In the past, no matter how much she hated herself, she couldn't let go of her child. Chapter 21:19. Does that mean she won't leave? Now, before Shun Manting remembered anything, he had already coaxed her to get the marriage certificate. She had been awake for more than half a month, and her body had almost recovered. Now she was on her period. When Shun Manting is pregnant, he won't let her go no matter what. As he thought about it, he looked at her with a pair of burning eyes. He quickly looked away, reached out to change the bedsheets, and said, "Sure, but this problem is not something we can control. If you're pregnant, you can't abort it." When Shun Manting heard this, she subconsciously covered her stomach and said softly, "If I abort it, the child will die, right?" "Yes," Shun Luoan replied. He turned his face to look at her seriously and said slowly, "No matter what, it is a small life. If a living human life is erased, what is the difference between it and direct murder?" Looking at Shun Manting in front of him, Shun Luoan's expression was solemn. When Shun Manting saw Shun Luoan's expression, she was a little frightened and said timidly, "Is not wanting to have a child the same as killing? There is no such saying." Shun Luoan put the bedsheets down. "It's just that if such a small life is already by your side, not only do you not cherish it, but you would rather choose to abandon it, then isn't that killing? Isn't that right?" His logic was impeccable, and Shun Manting was speechless for a moment. She subconsciously stroked her stomach and did not say anything. Just like when you were a child, you were abandoned on the street by your biological parents. If no kind-hearted people sent you to the orphanage at that time, would you be dead now? Then did your biological parents also kill you? Did they also become murderers? But they gave birth to me. Shun Manting couldn't help but refute. "We haven't given birth yet, have we? Why not? So you have to raise the child after you are born." Shun Luoan interrupted her. "If you're pregnant and don't want to give birth, what is the difference between you and them?" Shun Manting was speechless again. "So if you're pregnant, you must give birth." Shun Luoan looked at her with a serious expression. "Giving birth isn't as painful as you think. You've already given birth once. Don't be afraid." This time, he would be by her side, accompanying her from start to finish, taking care of her. When Shun Manting saw the look of anticipation on Shun Luoan's face, her unwavering heart suddenly wavered. Facing his threatening gaze, she shrunk her neck and said softly, "Then, if I'm pregnant, I'll give birth. If I'm not, I won't give birth." A smile finally appeared on Shun Luoan's face. He smiled and gently pulled her closer to him. He planted a kiss on her forehead and said softly, "Okay." When Shun Manting saw the happy expression on Shun Luoan's face, she felt as if she was a lamb in a tiger's den. He couldn't help but retort, "If I'm not pregnant, you can't use despicable means to make me pregnant." His little face puffed up, full of warning. Shun Luoan froze, but he didn't say anything. He hugged her and planted a kiss on her lips. Shun Manting vaguely guessed something and felt inexplicably unhappy. Chapter 2120. She was throwing a tantrum. Shun Luoan looked at her back and didn't care. He turned around and continued to change the bedsheets. It was always a little difficult to be alone. Shun Manting was sitting by the side, playing with the computer. When she saw that Shun Luoan had finished changing all the bedsheets, she slowly came over with the computer and lay down beside him. Shun Manting liked watching movies more and more, ever since Shun Luoan took her to watch Gone with the Wind. Today, they were watching Inception, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Shun Luoan glanced at the computer. It was a little late. "Aren't you going to sleep?" Shun Manting pretended not to hear him and stared at the computer. Shun Luoan smiled and quickly lay down and closed his eyes. However, Shun Manting was watching a movie, so it was impossible for Shun Luoan to fall asleep. In his mind, he had already unknowingly conceived a plan for the future. After Shun Manting was pregnant, he would put aside the matter of the laboratory and leave everything to Lao Wu. He only needed to go back occasionally and spend the rest of the time with her. In the past 2 years, Shun Manting had been in a coma, which was enough for him to worry about. Next, he would have a good rest for a year. When Shun Manting gave birth to the child, he would go back to the laboratory. If Shun Manting didn't regain her memory, of course, everything would be fine. If she recovered her memories during this period of time, then she would probably hate him a little less on account of how diligent he was and how serious he was. Moreover, he took good care of Xiao Yuer. Would that be enough to offset Shen Manting's resentment towards him when she grew up? Shen Luo and closed his eyes and lay in bed. His mind was racing. Shen Manting didn't know how much time had passed before she finally covered the laptop and put it aside. Then, she carefully lay down. After lying down, Shen Luo reached out and hugged her. Shen Manting was obviously shocked, and her whole body trembled. But she quickly reacted and elbowed Shen Luo. She said coquettishly, "You're so annoying. You're pretending to be asleep when you're not." "I'm not," Shen Luo smiled. "You just thought I was asleep. When did I tell you that I was asleep?" Shen Manting was a little unhappy and said, "You're twisting words and forcing logic." Shen Luo hugged her and whispered, "Let's sleep." The heating in the imperial capital had been turned off, and the weather was a little cold. At that moment, Shen Luo's arms were indescribably warm. Shen Manting leaned over and hugged him tightly. She closed her eyes. She was angry just now, but in fact, she was already very sleepy and soon fell asleep. However, just like in the past, he still had a series of nightmares. She dreamt that she was standing in the middle of a bustling wedding. Luxury cars were coming and going, and the beautiful bride was holding the hand of the handsome groom. Surrounded by the crowd, they walked out step by step. She watched from afar, watching their backs disappear into the luxurious villa, and then slowly retreated. She didn't know why. Even though she was just a bystander, at this moment, she couldn't help but feel pain in her heart. It was as if this had happened to him before. He slowly retreated, and soon he was out of everyone's sight. Chapter 21:21. Goodbye, Shen Luo. Her voice was filled with indescribable indifference and hatred that he had been familiar with for a long, long time. The low voice was particularly ear-piercing in the night. Shen Luo was awakened from his sleep and turned his head to look at Shen Manting. Shen Manting was very quiet, as if what he had just heard was just an illusion. He gently hugged Shen Manting beside him, his heart beating heavily. But his heart was getting emptier. Shen Manting seemed to feel Shen Luo's touch and embrace, and consciously leaned into his arms. Shen Luo held her in his arms and pinched the soft flesh on her waist that had grown in the past half a month. He couldn't help but call out softly, "Manting!" His voice was very soft and slightly trembling. Shen Manting seemed to have heard Shen Luo's voice and seemed to have dreamed of something happy. She snuggled into his arms and smiled with an indescribable emotion. Shen Luo had been paying attention to her expression, but under such weak light, he couldn't see it clearly. But Shen Manting was indeed smiling. Shen Luo couldn't help but call out softly again, "Manting!" Shen Manting didn't respond this time, and just breathed evenly. But Shen Luo couldn't fall asleep. He didn't know how long he had been awake, but Shen Manting suddenly moved. Shen Luo clearly felt it and looked down. Soon, Shen Manting moved again and said dreamily, "Shen Luo, Shen Luo, Shen Luo's body suddenly stiffened. Although her voice was soft, the indifference in it was still real, and Shen Luo could hear it clearly. This soft call seemed to be just a temporary nightmare. Soon, Shen Manting calmed down. He subconsciously hugged her tightly, and his heart was in a mess. After a long time, Shen Manting sobbed again. "No, I beg you." Shen Luo was on the verge of breaking down. He hugged her tightly in his arms and couldn't hold himself back any longer. His breathing became heavy, and he called out softly, "Manting, Manting, wake up. Don't continue. Wake up, wake up." His voice was choked with sobs, filled with panic and guilt. Shen Luo admitted that he was selfish. He never wanted Shen Manting to regain her memory. From the moment he knew that she was no longer Shen Manting, he had already made up his mind to keep her by his side. Now, she could dream more and more of the past, and she was getting closer and closer to regaining her memory. Absolutely not. Shen Luo's excessive action woke Shen Manting up. When she opened her eyes, her face seemed to be a little wet, especially her eyes. Her vision was obscured by tears. Shin-Manting looked at him blankly and called, "Luos." Shin-Manting was a little confused. She looked at him and shouted, "Hubby." Manting was a Shun. Shin-Luo, and calmed down when he heard the familiar voice. Lowering his eyes, he looked into her clear eyes and couldn't help but hug her tightly. Lowering his head, he gently kissed her lips. His movement was so sudden that Shin-Manting didn't have time to react and was swept away by him in an instant. Shin-Luo, Anne's movements were a little heavy and urgent. She wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but she actually felt that he was a little nervous. She placed her palm on his back and gently patted him like how he usually comforted her. Chapter 21-22. Feeling Shin-Luo Anne's emotions, Shin-Manting suddenly remembered a very impressive sentence in a movie that she had watched recently. People who have no sense of security will feel nervous because they are afraid of losing. For some reason, this sentence automatically came to Shin-Manting's mind. Shin-Luo and noticed Shin-Manting's movements, and inexplicably felt more at ease, and his movements unconsciously became much gentler. The kiss didn't last long, and soon Shin-Luo and let go of Shin-Manting. Shin-Manting opened her eyes and looked at him and asked softly, "Honey, did you have a nightmare?" Her soft voice was particularly seductive in this night. Her tone was completely different from the indifference and alienation she had when she was sleeping. This Shin-Manting was even more pleasing to him. Shin-Luo and gently hugged her and whispered, "I dreamed that you were going to leave me, just like 2 or 3 years ago." When Shin-Manting heard this, she immediately pushed him away and said, "Honey, how can you curse your own wife like this?" His own wife. Shin-Luo and couldn't help but smile, and the anxiety in his heart dissipated in an instant. "Didn't I have a car accident 2 or 3 years ago?" Shin-Manting rebuked, "I won't. Don't curse me, or I'll be hit by a car again, and you'll lose your wife again." Shin-Luo smiled, held her in his arms, and whispered, "Yes, I won't. But, honey, I also had a nightmare." Shin-Manting hooked his shoulder and pouted, "I dreamed that I gave birth to a child, and you weren't by my side. I was alone in the hospital, and I was so scared. Then I stayed in the hospital alone, and I didn't have food to eat. I was so hungry, and then I bought the same food as others, but I couldn't eat because I gave birth to a child." As she spoke, Shin-Manting's voice gradually became softer, with a little sadness. "I feel so pitiful, so sad, and my heart hurts, as if it really happened." Shin-Manting hugged Shin-Luo tighter, and her heart ached, and she whispered softly, "But these dreams are fake, right? These things didn't happen at all, and they're not real. Honey, you wouldn't treat me like that. You wouldn't even come to see me after I gave birth, would you?" Shin-Luo Anne's heart was empty for a moment, and it was terrible. Yes, it was very possible that all of these things had happened. At that time, Shin-Manting gave birth, and he was 2 days late. When she gave birth, it was the time when she needed the child's father the most, but he wasn't there. The day after she gave birth was when a woman was at her weakest, and he wasn't there. It was only on the 3rd day that he finally arrived. He had let her down. Shin-Luo was silent for a while before he said, "I told you it was a dream. It's impossible not to feel anything, but a dream is a dream." He caressed her long hair and said softly, "Don't take it seriously." Shin-Manting hugged him and felt a little more at ease. She rubbed herself against his chest and said coquettishly, "Hubby, my stomach hurts. It's bloated and painful. Help me rub it." She reached out and pulled his palm to touch her lower abdomen. Shin-Luo's warm palms caressed her lower abdomen, massaging it gently. Chapter 21-23. She didn't know how many times she had woken up from her sleep. Shin-Manting looked at the ceiling blankly. She subconsciously reached out to touch her side, but it was already empty, with only a little residual warmth. She got up and was surrounded by a dazzling light. At the same time, the door of the bathroom was opened. Shin-Manting looked over and saw Shin-Luo dressed neatly, coming out from inside. When he saw her, Shin-Luo stepped forward. Shin-Manting shrank back, as if she was facing a formidable enemy. She seemed to be at a loss and exclaimed, Shunluo, Shunluo, and stopped moving forward, and his back stiffened. Looking at Shun Manting in front of him in disbelief, Shunluo and suddenly panicked. But soon, Shun Manting's face became a little blank. Looking at Shunluo, she frowned and said, Honey. Shun Manting's voice was filled with confusion. She looked up at Shunluo, who was standing still, and put her palm on her chest. Shunluo, and felt as if his heart was being squeezed. He looked at Shun Manting in front of him and walked over step by step. Shun Manting looked at him, and her eyes trembled, but she resisted. She shrank back, lay down again, and covered herself with the quilt. Shunluo stopped moving and stood still, pursing his lips. No one made a sound, and the room was very quiet. After a long time, Shunluo said, Are you not feeling well? Shun Manting didn't say anything and covered herself with the quilt with her back to him. Shunluo walked over and said, Girls are more uncomfortable these days, but it will be over in a few days. Do you want to get up and change the cushion? It's not good for your health if you use it for a long time. Shun Manting's eyes were tightly shut, and she subconsciously clamped her legs together. But was a little wet, and it felt like it was dirty again. Feeling a little embarrassed, Shun Manting whispered with her back to him, Honey, help me find one. I'll change it myself. Shunluo's heart calmed down, and his originally tense mood and expression completely relaxed at this moment. He was in a good mood and replied, Okay. Shunluo went to the cabinet and took out a tablet that Mrs. Shun had prepared some time ago and handed it to her. Shun Manting's head popped out from under the quilt, and her cheeks were red. He reached out his hand to pull it back, but quickly retracted it and said, You can go. I'll get up by myself. It was very likely that his pants would be dirted. It was too embarrassing. Shun Manting shyly covered herself with the blanket, not daring to show her face. Suddenly, she heard Shunluo's chuckle. Then, the sound of his footsteps gradually faded away. He didn't get up until he heard the door open and close. Shun Manting blushed. She pinched the thing in her hand and lifted the quilt. On the dark bedsheet, there was an even darker mark that was very eye-catching. As expected, Shun Manting held the piece of pink bread in her hand and slowly made her way to the bathroom. Only then did he realize that his pants were all dirty. Crestfallen, he returned to the cloakroom to search for clean clothes. When he opened the drawer, he saw the 2 red booklets that had been quietly placed there not long ago. The 3 golden words were especially eye-catching. She didn't know why, but when she saw those 3 words, she felt very uncomfortable. When he opened it, the photo of the 2 of them was especially eye-catching. His breathing became short, and his head felt as if it had been hit by a sharp object. Shun Manting's vision darkened, and her legs gave way. She fell to the ground. Chapter 21-24. The whole world was shaking, and everything familiar around her seemed to be far away. It was so familiar that it was no longer familiar. She fell limply, unable to muster up any strength. Shunluo closed the door behind him, but he didn't leave. He leaned against the door, panicking for no reason. A voice in his heart strongly reminded him that she was about to wake up. He had this feeling before, but it had never been as strong as it was now. His heart was beating strongly, quickly, with panic and guilt. Shunluo hesitated for a moment, then opened the door again. However, he heard heavy breathing coming from the cloakroom. His heart skipped a beat, and he strode forward. Shun Manting was lying on the ground, her eyes half closed, and she looked over with difficulty. Her eyes were filled with all kinds of emotions. 4 Shunluo, and each of them carried a heavy and fatal destructive force. Subconsciously holding his breath, Shunluo felt that something was quickly withdrawing from him. Shun Manting looked at him and seemed to twitch her lips. At the same time, a drop of water fell from the corner of her eye. The next moment, Shun Manting weakly lowered her head and closed her eyes. Manting! Shunluo felt terribly empty, and he picked her up. At this moment, Shun Manting's face was pale, and she leaned against him weakly. She had already lost consciousness. Shunluo looked at her, and his heart trembled. He panicked and lost. The smell of disinfectant was very unpleasant. Shun Manting opened her eyes, and there was a burst of pain in her lower abdomen. She stared at the white ceiling above her head, and after a long time, she looked away. She sat up, and it was quiet all around. The lights in the ward were not on, and the windows were open. The wind was a little strong, and the curtains were rolled up high, fluttering. At the same time, there was a faint smell of tobacco. Shun Manting looked sideways and saw a figure standing by the window, both elbows leaning on the windowsill, holding a cigarette between his fingers. "It's him." Shun Manting smiled silently and raised her hand to touch the top of her left fifth rib. Here, his heart was beating faster and faster. This was the feeling of being alive. She was still alive. Still alive, Shun Luo and put out the cigarette, turned around, and looked at her. At this moment, Shun Manting's eyes were clear and her mind was clear. A pair of eyes looked at him indifferently and calmly. The corners of her pale lips curled up slightly. She seemed to be mocking him, but at the same time, it also seemed to be a greeting between old friends. She said, "Shun Luo," and felt a lump in his throat, and an indescribable sense of suffocation welled up from the bottom of his heart. His body tensed up, and he slowly walked forward. Shun Manting looked at him. She was surprisingly calm. She watched helplessly as Shun Luo and walked up to her and smiled. His smile was filled with a gentleness she had never seen before. It was as if he was facing another person. Or perhaps he was facing another Shun Manting. "You're awake?" Shun Luo An's voice was soft and gentle. He reached out and was about to touch her forehead. Shun Manting narrowed her eyes and raised her hand to slap him away. Shun Luo An paused for a moment, then calmly retracted his hand. The smile on his face didn't change. He walked to the bedside table and said, "Mom just stewed some soup. It took a long time. Drink it quickly and you'll be discharged. Your son is waiting for Mom and Dad to come home." However, Shun Manting looked at him expressionlessly. Looking at the gentle smile on his face, she felt extremely sarcastic in her heart. The corner of Shun Manting's mouth twitched coldly, and she said slowly, "Is it interesting?" Chapter 21-25. The thermos rolled on the ground twice, but it was safe and sound. However, Shun Luo and remained motionless, as if he had been struck by lightning. With his back facing her, an indescribable bitterness welled up in him. It broke through his throat, broke through his shackles, and overflowed into his eyes. In the end, it had come. What he feared and worried about still couldn't escape. Shun Manting looked at his back coldly and asked, "How long was I lying there?" Shun Luo and suppressed his surging emotions and kept his back facing her. He bent down to pick up the thermos and wiped it with 2 tissues before saying, "A day about 12 hours. Shun Manting was stunned and sneered. "Do you think I'm an idiot? If it's 12 hours, it should be dawn by now. Moreover, I was hit by a car, but there was no pain on her body. It was strange. She clearly felt that she was in so much pain that she was about to die. The sound of bones breaking seemed to still be ringing in her body. But now her limbs were fine, and she didn't feel any pain at all, except for her stomach. There was a familiar pain in her lower abdomen. It must be her period. When the car accident happened, she had just finished her period, and it happened in the middle of the night. If it had been 12 hours, it should be past 10 o'clock in the morning." Without a doubt, Shun Luo was lying to her. He had put in a lot of effort to escape the blame for the car accident. He had to make soup and smile. It was hard on him. Shun Manting only felt sarcastic, but she didn't realize that Shun Luo was once again frozen in place. With his back facing her, Shun Luo had a crazy thought. She seemed to have forgotten everything that had happened during this period of time, including marrying him and those days and nights of indulgence. "Wait, I'll ask Julia to come." Shun Luo put the thermos back on the bedside table and walked out without looking back. After closing the door, Shun Luo called Shun Julia with trembling hands. The call was quickly connected, and Shun Julia's voice came through. "Brother, Julia, Manting is awake, but..." Shun Julia looked at Shun Manting in front of him and asked again, "Do you remember the date of the car accident?" I don't remember. How long do you think you slept? Not long. It feels like less than a day. Yeah. Shunjulia nodded. Do you still remember me? What do you think? She asked. Shunjulia chuckled and opened his arms to her. Sister Manting, welcome back. Shun Manting was a little dazed as he hugged her, but it was only for a moment before Shunjulia let go. Brother, come out for a moment. Shun Luo already knew. Shun Manting couldn't remember returning to the time when she was 12 years old. She couldn't remember anything that had happened since she first woke up this morning. From the looks of it, it's selective amnesia, Shunjulia said slowly. It's actually quite normal for such a situation to occur. Julia, Shun Luo's voice was a little hoarse. She still hates me, just like before. Shunjulia was silent. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He patted him on the shoulder and said, take it slow. You can't rush things. Shun Luo remained silent. Shunjulia looked at him for a long time before whispering, I think you should be glad that she can't remember. Chapter 21-26. Shun Luo fell silent again. Shunjulia felt sympathy for him. He patted him on the shoulder and said, Sister Manting just said that she wants to be discharged. Yes. The entire journey back home was silent. Shun Manting went straight to her nanny's room. The nanny's room was very, very small. After 2 years of accumulation, it had become a storeroom. At this moment, it was filled with things. The things that he had used in the past, old and new, were all gone. Her phone was nowhere to be found. Shun Manting was silent for a long time before she sighed heavily. Before the accident, she had been sleeping in his room. It didn't seem to matter if he slept with her again. However, time seemed to pass for a very, very long time. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to pile up to this extent in just one day. How long had she slept? Do you need this thing? Shun Luo asked, startling Shun Manting. Shun Luo turned around and saw a pack of sanitary napkins in his hand. Shun Manting glanced at it and grabbed it, saying, Of course I need it. All right, come to my room and sleep. Shun Luo turned around and said, There are too many things here. It'll take some time to tidy them up. Shun Manting remained silent and stood with her back to him. Shun Luo sighed and said, I'll sleep on the sofa. Come over. With that, Shun Luo's footsteps faded away. Shun Manting turned her head and saw his back. The lights in the corridor cast a long shadow on his body. Shun Manting felt a little complicated. She held the bag in her hand, turned around, and walked into the room. He would not wrong himself. Shun Manting went to the cloakroom and found many well-fitting clothes. However, his style seemed to be much cuter than hers. They were all pink, red, green, and blue. They were all cute pink colors. He found a set of pink bunny pajamas and took a bath before falling asleep. Shun Luo sat in the living room and smoked. Shun Luo seemed to have expected all of this, so when it came, he didn't seem to feel anything other than heaviness. She was still the same. Just like 2 years ago. 2 years ago, she wouldn't have left. 2 years later, would she still not leave? So be it. That was pretty good too. As long as she was still around. That was what he was thinking, but the smoke drifted up and into his eyes, stinging his eyes. Chuckling softly, he extinguished the cigarette. However, it was so uncomfortable that it was almost suffocating. He lay down and covered himself with a thin blanket. He closed his eyes, but his consciousness was clear. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly heard a cry, the sound of a woman crying. Shun Luo opened his eyes abruptly. Before he could react, he heard the sound of the door opening and the crying suddenly became louder. He sat up and looked into the distance. It was Shun Manting. When Shun Manting saw him, she sniffed hard and rushed over to him, shouting, Hubby! Shun Luo was stunned. Before he could react, he was hugged by her soft body. Shun Manting cried loudly and hugged his neck tightly. She sobbed and shouted, Honey, I just had a nightmare. I was scared to death, sob. Shun Luo couldn't react at all. He subconsciously raised his hands to hug her, but he didn't dare to raise them. For a moment, they were frozen in midair. The commotion outside had also awakened the others. Shunjulia came out of the room and turned on the lights. Shenluo and subconsciously narrowed his eyes and looked over. Chapter 21-27. Shenmanting also looked over and saw that it was Shun Julia. She wiped her eyes and wanted to stop. However, she still couldn't control herself and burst into tears. Shun Julia looked at Shenmanting and then at Shenluo. He saw that Shenluo and was also at a loss. Shenluo and turned around and patted her back gently. He said slowly, "Good girl, don't cry." Shenmanting's crying stopped a little. She sat in Shenluo An's arms and sobbed, "Hubby, sob." Shenluo and looked at her in silence. He looked at her and found that at this moment, her eyes were clear and clouded with a layer of mist. She was looking at him with a wronged expression. She was like a child who got up in the middle of the night and couldn't find her parents. She was at a loss and helpless. Shen Julia saw it clearly and called out, "Sister-in-law." Shenmanting looked over and wiped her eyes while sobbing. Shenluo and gave her a tissue. His emotions were very complicated. Shenmanting took it and wiped her tears and blew her nose. She said pitifully, "Did I wake you up? Go to sleep. I just had a nightmare." "Okay," Shun Julia replied, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped forward and asked, "What did you dream about?" Shun Julia wasn't the only one who was curious about this question. Even Shenluo and turned his head away. Shenmanting sobbed and said, "I dreamed that I chased my husband away." As she spoke, she trembled as she cried, and her tears once again poured down. "But my heart, it hurts so much. I don't want to drive my husband away, but I can't control myself. I feel so sad." His voice was intermittent, and he sounded like he was about to cry. Shenluo and was silent and gently patted her back. She looked up at Shun Julia and found that his face was solemn. "What's wrong?" Yi Qianqian's voice came over. Yi Qianqian walked over in her nightgown. When she saw Shun Manting sobbing, she touched Shun Julia and asked, "Did you quarrel?" "It's okay." Shun Julia squeezed Yi Qianqian's hand and looked at Shun Luoan. He said meaningfully, "Brother, take sister-in-law in first." "Yes," Shun Luoan replied. He got up and gently pulled her along. "Let's go in first." Shenmanting was sobbing obediently. As soon as she entered the room, she hugged his neck tightly and whispered, "Hubby, do you love me?" Shenluo and was about to be pulled up. He pulled her into his embrace and sighed softly, "Love, of course I love you. Then can you promise me one thing?" Shenmanting looked up at him with an aggrieved expression. "If I chase you away in the future, it will definitely be fake. I don't want to chase you away. If I'm not dreaming, I'll really chase you away. Don't go. I don't want you to go. Don't go." Shenluo An's heart softened. He couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her. His palm brushed through her hair, and he whispered, "What if you're serious about chasing me away?" "That's impossible," Shenmanting said with a serious expression. "That's not me. Hubby, don't go. What if I take it seriously?" Shenluo An's voice was as light as a feather and ethereal. Shenmanting choked on her words and stared at him blankly. After a long time, she said, "Then when I wake up from my dream, I'll go after you." Yi Qianqian felt that something was wrong. Why was Shenmanting crying in the living room all of a sudden? She nudged Shun Julia and said, "Old Shun, Big Brother's temper is terrible. Did he get angry at Manting?" Chapter 21-28. Yi Qianqian felt that everything was strange. She suddenly remembered and said, "By the way, hubby, didn't you tell me that Manting regained her memory? Why is she Shun Julia put his finger to his lips and sat down on the bed. He frowned and thought for a while before saying, "Well, I'm afraid it's a little troublesome." Shenluo and coaxed Shun Manting to sleep before he walked out. He reached out and knocked on Shun Julia's door twice. Then he walked straight to the sofa and sat down. Shun Julia walked out and saw Shenluo An's solemn expression. He asked, "Was Sister Manting asleep just now?" Then she suddenly woke up and became the 12-year-old Manting again. Shenluo and took out a cigarette, lit it, and responded calmly, "Yes, it's a split personality." Shun Julia finished his diagnosis and said it word by word. Every word made Shenluo and feel very complicated. He looked at Shun Julia and asked, "What do you mean?" To put it simply, it's very likely that sister-in-law doesn't want to remember the past, but there's another consciousness in her subconscious that is trying to awaken this memory. Shun Julia slowly analyzed. Sister Manting wants to wake up, but sister-in-law doesn't want to. There's a difference between the two, and from one person to two people. But now, Shun Julia's words made it clear that he treated Shin Manting as a completely different person. Shen Luo and was silent. He smoked silently, and his mind was in a mess. Is this a split personality? Yi Qianqian leaned over with a look of disbelief on her face. I've only seen it in novels and comics. How could Manting hit someone? Shen Julia said. So far, neither Sister Manting nor sister-in-law are aggressive. Yes, I think so too. Yi Qianqian sat beside Shen Luo and felt a little sorry for him. She asked, "Brother, is sister-in-law asleep now?" Yes. Shen Luo and had a headache and reached out to rub his temples. What should I do? He couldn't stand Shin Manting like this. He couldn't tell when it was her, and when it was her. He had no idea. Do you want sister-in-law to wake up, or Sister Manting to wake up? Shen Julia asked slowly. Shen Luo and smoked a cigarette and looked up at Shun Julia. Shun Julia's expression was indescribably solemn. Shen Luo and didn't know what he was feeling at that moment. He let out a long puff of smoke and laughed. I don't know. He really didn't know. Both Shin Manting and Shun Manting were Shin Manting. Only when the two of them existed together could Shin Manting be the real Shin Manting. This situation was completely out of his expectations. He felt lucky and sorrowful at the same time. Of the two personalities, one is the primary personality, which dominates most of the body's consciousness and actions. The secondary personality is in a passive state, Shun Julia said slowly. For what I heard from sister-in-law, when Sister Manting is active, she may not be sure if she's dreaming or really moving, but it's very likely that she's aware of it. Then, when she's on the move, does Manting also sense it? Yi Qianqian asked. Both Manting and the two men understood who she was referring to. Chapter 21-29. When Shun Manting woke up, she was surrounded by light. She got up and went to the bathroom. At a glance, she saw the toiletries by the sink. They were very familiar. There was a pink toothbrush, a pink cup, and a cute strawberry-flavored toothpaste. It was so childish. Shin Manting picked them up naturally and brushed her teeth. After washing her face carefully, she naturally went to the cloakroom and found a dress to change into. She walked to the door in a good mood. When she reached out to open the door, she suddenly stopped. All of this seemed so familiar that she didn't need anyone's guidance. Shin Manting froze and stopped moving. She turned her head and looked at the huge suite behind her. The suite was very large. In this villa, besides Shun Longyue's room, Shun Luo An's room was the largest. It was so spacious that it was dazzling. Every decoration and every piece of furniture was familiar to her. It was obviously completely different from before the car accident. Shun Luo An was more solemn and had a cold temper. He liked cool colors, but there were a lot of pink and green things in this room. Were they the children's? No, it shouldn't be. In addition to the toys, there were decorations on the wall, photos. Yes, the photo wall. Shin Manting looked over and saw the wall full of photo frames. She hadn't noticed before. These things were very natural. It was as if they had always been there. And Shin Manting remembered that Shun Luo and never liked to do these things. Shin Manting walked over and was slightly taken aback. Everything was too familiar. Pictures after pictures, faces after faces. There was him and her. In one of them, she and Shin Luo were holding a fair and tender child who looked 1 or 2 years old, smiling brightly. And Shun Luo was looking at her with a smile, his eyes deep and gentle. Shin Manting felt that something was wrong. The woman in the photo was too thin, thinner than she was at her thinnest. Was it her? The child they were holding? The features were very similar to Shun Luo An's. Was it her son? Shin Manting suddenly became enlightened. She looked at the child in the photo and suddenly seemed to understand. The child was her and Shunluo's child. Before the car accident, the child was only a few months old, but now looking at the photo, he was at least 1 or 2 years old. She really slept for a long time, at least a year. But when he looked at himself in the photo, he had a heavy feeling of doubt. She had just woken up. Why was she taking photos with Shunluo? And she stood beside Shunluo, and with the baby in her arms and a bright smile on her face. It was as if she was truly happy. She stood beside Shunluo and without any ill feelings. His demeanor made Shinmanting a little uncomfortable. This wasn't her. It couldn't be her. However, she knew better than anyone that this was her. This was Shinmanting. Even the small mole under the earlobe was exactly the same. This was something that no substitute could replicate. But how could that be possible? Shinmanting subconsciously took a step back in disbelief. Knock, knock. There was a careful knock on the door. Shinmanting turned her head, and soon she saw that the door had been opened. Shunluo walked in, looking exhausted. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes. When he saw Shinmanting's dazed expression, he knew who she was. Chapter 21:30. It was already past 10 o'clock, and most of his family members had already left for work. Nanny was playing outside with Little Moon, while Yi Qianqian was sitting on the sofa outside, ready to rush over if anything happened. The two people in the room sat facing each other, and neither of them spoke first. Shinmanting flipped her hair. She wasn't in a hurry. She drank the soy milk in front of her and nibbled on the bread, waiting for him to speak first. However, even after she had finished her breakfast, she did not hear the man in front of her utter a single word. She couldn't take it anymore. She looked at him and frowned. "Weren't you the one who wanted to talk to me?" "Yes," Shunluo replied. "Manting, you haven't seen your son since you woke up, have you?" As she spoke, she stood up. "I'll bring my son in." Shinmanting was baffled. She frowned and shouted, "Shunluo, what the hell are you doing?" Shunluo quickly opened the door and walked out. When Yi Qianqian heard the commotion, she immediately craned her neck to take a look. Shunluo ignored her and quickly walked over to his son. He said, "Baby, do you miss your mother?" Little Moon was playing with his building blocks. When he heard this, he immediately stood up and nodded. "Yes." Shunluo picked up the baby and quickly returned to the room. The moment he stepped into the room, Yi Qianqian looked at him again. He closed the door and quickly turned around with his son in his arms. "Mom!" Little Moon shouted happily. He opened his arms and gestured in Shinmanting's direction. "Little Moon missed you." Shinmanting stared blankly at the child in front of her. She still couldn't wrap her head around what was happening. This was her son. Shunluo walked over with Shun Yuexiao in his arms and handed the baby to her. Shinmanting hugged him in a daze, and the little boy immediately took the initiative to hug her. He kissed her on the lips and said, "Mommy, kiss me." Although the little guy said that his body was not honest at all, he wriggled around in Shinmanting's arms. Finally, he wrapped his arms around her neck and stood on her lap. Throughout the entire process, Shinmanting didn't have any reaction other than supporting herself with her hands. Looking at Shun Yuexiao's familiar face, she didn't feel anything strange in her heart, but at the same time, it was filled with a sense of wonder. It shouldn't be like this, but it should be like this. A very strange feeling. Shinmanting lowered her head and hugged Shun Yuexiao in her arms. "Little Moon," she called. "Mom." Little Moon was very excited to hear Shinmanting call his name. "Ride the wooden horse." "Do you want to ride a wooden horse?" Shinmanting chuckled. "How about I take you there?" "Great." Little Moon looked very excited. "Put on your shoes." "All right, I'll take you there." Shinmanting stood up and walked out with the baby in her arms. Without any guidance or warning, she actually entered the baby's nursery. Yi Qianqian stood outside and watched Shinmanting walk in. She subconsciously stood up and followed her. When Shinmanting saw Yi Qianqian, she was a little surprised and asked, "Qianqian, aren't you going to work?" When Yi Qianqian heard that, she chuckled and looked a little embarrassed. "I stopped working a long time ago. What do you want?" "Help Little Moon put on his shoes. Let's go to the amusement park later. The baby wants to go." Shen Manting put Shen Yuexiao down and found his shoes. Chapter 21:31. However, it turned out that schizophrenia was no different from an ordinary person. After Shen Manting helped Shen Yuexiao put on his shoes, she stood up and looked at Yi Qianqian. Do you want to go with me? Let's go together. Aunt, let's ride the wooden horse. Shen Yuexiao looked at Yi Qianqian and extended his hand with the most sincere smile. Let's play together. Yi Qianqian looked at him and asked cautiously, Big brother, are you not going? Sure enough, as soon as she said that, she found that Shen Manting's expression did not look good. He coughed lightly and said, I just think that if we go out to play, it'll be more fun for a family of 3, right? Besides, sister-in-law, your health hasn't recovered yet. It's more appropriate for a man to take care of you. Forget it. Shen Manting did not give her any face at all. Shen Luo, and has to go to the laboratory now. He's very busy. Yi Qianqian felt that she had said the wrong thing. It seemed that Shen Manting's hatred for Shen Luo and was not light at all. She thought about it and said, I want to go. I'm bored to death at home. Wait for me. I'll go change my clothes. Okay, Shen Manting replied. Yi Qianqian felt uncomfortable all over. She was used to the enthusiasm and vivacity of the 12-year-old Shen Manting. Now that the real Shen Manting was here, she felt that she was cold everywhere. It was as if the whole family owed her 5 million yuan. Bah, she did not owe them. Yi Qianqian quickly changed into a new set of clothes and happily rolled out. She glanced at her and said, Sister-in-law, you didn't bring your bag? The bag we bought together a few days ago looks good on you. Which one? Shen Manting asked subconsciously. Yi Qianqian noticed that she called her sister-in-law, but she did not seem to notice. She answered every time she called her sister-in-law, and her answers were very smooth. Her heart was slightly moved, but she did not show it on her face. She said, the pink one with a lump of hair hanging on it. The pink one with hair hanging on it? The image of the bag immediately appeared in Shen Manting's mind. She subconsciously said, Is it the one that looks like a camera? Yes, yes. Yi Qianqian nodded. Take it and go. We might have to queue up for a long time. However, Shen Manting remained silent. He looked at Yi Qianqian and frowned. Yi Qianqian froze, but she didn't let it show on her face. She asked, What's wrong? What happened to me yesterday? Yi Qianqian didn't know how to respond to the sudden question. She thought about it for a moment before answering. He probably fainted. Why did you suddenly faint? Maybe. Aunt Flo came, and she wasn't feeling well, so she fainted. It's not like I've never had my period before. Shen Manting looked straight at her. Moreover, my memory only stops at the time of the car accident. When I woke up, I was alive and kicking. You don't seem to find it strange. Oh, Yi Qianqian's expression was calm. I know. You lost your memory. Our Juliet is a psychiatrist. What's so strange about this? The strangest thing about her was actually her essence. After Yi Qianqian labeled Shen Manting as a psycho in her heart, she could no longer look her in the eye. However, she could not say it. Shen Manting frowned. You know that I lost my memory. Do you think I'm the same as before yesterday? Chapter 21:32. Haha, of course it's different. I've already said that you're split. How could it be the same? However, what she was thinking in her heart was not what she said. Facing Shen Manting's strange gaze, Yi Qianqian calmly said, It's the same. What's the difference? You're still you. Shen Manting was speechless. But why did she feel that something was wrong? She put the baby down and said, I'll go look for the baby. Okay. Yi Qianqian was finally free. She quickly took the baby and let out a long sigh. Shen Manting walked into the room. Shen Luo and was still sitting in his original position with a pack of cigarettes in front of him. When he saw her come in, he subconsciously covered the cigarette between his fingers and looked at her. Shen Manting's first reaction was to say, Why are you smoking again? Such a subconscious reaction popped up like a conditioned reflex. But she held it back. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Shen Luo and saw her expression and reached out to snuff out the cigarette. He said, I'm not smoking anymore. Shen Manting frowned and felt a little panicked. This kind of panic came inexplicably. She walked into the cloakroom with ease, but her heart was beating faster and faster. In the cloakroom, there was a special compartment for storing bags. There were all kinds of leather bags in it. Pink, green, pink, blue, black, and white a lot. A lot. It was said that it could cure all kinds of diseases. Her bag could cure more diseases than 100 diseases. It was too shocking. They were all hers, thump, thump. Her heart was beating fast. Shinmanting reached out and grabbed the pink camera bag. She opened it and saw all the IDs in it. Everything that should be there was there. There was also a beautiful and delicate purse that looked like a notepad. When she opened it, there was a stack of cash. It was not much, only about 1,000 yuan, but there were several cards lined up inside. There were gold, blue, and green cards. There were 2 savings cards and a credit card. On the back of the card, the owner's name was written in 3 big characters. Shinluo. Shinmanting even felt like she was dreaming when she put everything away. What did she get along with Shinluo and so well and harmoniously? 2/3 of the cloakroom was filled with her clothes and a large variety of bags. On the dressing table, luxurious skincare products were placed, as well as all kinds of expensive and luxurious jewelry. His head was throbbing. The sudden awakening, and everything she had was completely different from her previous life and everything she had imagined. Shinmanting crouched down with her arms around her head and groaned in pain. When Shinluo heard the faint sound, he immediately stood up and walked in. When he saw Shinmanting squatting on the ground, he vaguely guessed what had happened. He stepped forward and stood by her side, asking softly, "Are you not feeling well?" Uncomfortable. It was indeed uncomfortable. She looked up and saw Shinluo. He was very tall and stood against the light. Under the heavy shadows, she could clearly see the complex expression on his face. Shinmanting frowned. She didn't know where the anger came from, but it was stuck in her chest. She opened her mouth and said, "Did you do a lot of bad things when I was unconscious?" Shinluo was taken aback by the sudden question. Chapter 21:33. Obviously, she couldn't. Shinmanting wouldn't accept it. She couldn't accept it. Staring at Shinluo and above her head, Shinmanting wanted to get angry, but she couldn't. It was as if there was another consciousness in her heart that was preventing her from getting angry with him. This feeling came suddenly and inexplicably, and Shinmanting felt suffocated. She stood up, but her head still hurt. Shinluo saw her look and stepped closer. He didn't show any emotion on his face and said softly, "I can't make it up." Shinmanting looked up at him with anger in her eyes. Unexpectedly, Shinluo took a step forward and stood in front of her. "But I still have to make it up." Shinluo looked at her and said, "I'm trying my best, whether I can make it up or not." Shinmanting looked at Shinluo in front of her and felt familiar yet strange. Was Shinluo like this? That's not it. Shinluo wasn't like this. Besides, Shinluo said again and stared deeply into Shinmanting's eyes with a pair of amber eyes, "I'm not just giving you material things." Shinmanting was forced to take a step back under his gaze. Shinluo took another step forward and said slowly, "I'm also giving you my heart." Shinmanting felt uncomfortable all over and took another step back. Unexpectedly, Shinluo reached out and held her hand. Shinmanting was shocked. Before she could react, Shinluo held her hand and pressed it to his heart. "Here, it's beating for you." It was obviously a normal body temperature, a normal warmth. Shinmanting felt inexplicably scorching. Shinmanting immediately withdrew her hand. She pretended to be frightened and shouted, "Shinluo, are you crazy?" His words made her so disgusted that she had goosebumps all over her body. How could such words come out of Shinluo's mouth? "Yes, I'm crazy," Shinluo said calmly. Shinluo replied calmly, "I almost went crazy when you got into that car accident 2 years ago." 2 years ago, Shinmanting was in a trance when she heard this. "I've always regretted it," Shinluo said as he held her hand. "If I had reflected on myself and not pushed you so hard, or if my temper had been a little better, Would things have turned out differently? Shun Manting shuddered and said, I've been waiting for you to wake up for the past 2 years, Shun Luo interrupted her. You were bedridden for 2 years. You were in a vegetative state for 2 years. Do you know that? Shun Manting widened her eyes and looked at Shun Luo in disbelief. She was in a vegetative state for 2 years? How could she possibly know? I'm really afraid that you'll never wake up. Shun Luo took another step forward and forced her into a corner. Little Moon is still so young. He needs his mother. Shun Manting didn't know what to say. She stared blankly at Shun Luo, and there was a faint smell of tobacco on his body, but it wasn't unpleasant. It seemed that he was used to it, so he didn't feel any disgust. On the contrary, she felt that his scent made her feel very safe. Shun Manting looked away, and her heart wavered for a moment. He wore a simple shirt and stood straight. He looked thin and gentle. However, there was an unconcealable tiredness in his eyes and a strong sense of affection. Chapter 21:34. Shun Luo covered her face with his palm. His eyes were gentle, and he seemed to be different from the manic and immoral man in her memory. Shun Manting shrank back and reached out to grab his hand that was caressing her cheek. Shun Luo took the opportunity to hold her hand and said softly, "Believe me, every word I'm saying now is true." His words were full of sincerity. Shun Manting found them familiar. It was as if Shun Luo had said them before she knew it. Every word automatically overlapped in her mind. There was a shadow in her mind that overlapped with Shun Luo in front of her. Shun Luo's affectionate look made Shun Manting's mind a mess. Shun Manting's head hurt even more. She frowned and lowered her head. "Shun Luo, my head hurts." Shun Luo's eyes flashed, and he said, "Go lie down for a while." As he spoke, he picked her up without hesitation. Shun Manting screamed and immediately hugged Shun Luo's neck. She steadied herself and looked sideways at Shun Luo's handsome face. She closed her eyes and felt dizzy. Shun Manting was placed on the bed and soon closed her eyes. Shun Luo sat beside her in silence. His heart felt like it had been knocked over. It was very complicated. "I know you have always hated me." Shun Luo's back was facing her. He put his elbows on his legs and covered his face. His voice was a little muffled. He said, "But 2 or 3 years have passed. Manting, we still have to live our lives. I want to make it up to you. Can you give me a chance?" Give him a chance and give her a chance too. After Shun Luo's voice fell, there was a long silence in the room. After more than 10 seconds, there was a faint sob behind him. Shun Luo froze slightly and turned to look. Shun Manting grabbed the quilt, and her eyes were full of tears. She looked at Shun Luo with a pitiful face and pouted. "Honey!" Shun Luo's head was throbbing. Shun Manting rushed to Shun Luo and said, "Honey, who were you talking to just now?" Shun Luo pulled her into his arms and whispered, "With you." "No, you're not talking to me." Shun Manting whimpered. "You never talk to me like that. You're talking to someone else, aren't you?" Little Shun Manting's mental age was only 12 years old. But as an orphan, she was more sensitive than most adults in certain aspects. Shun Luo held her in his arms. His heart ached when he heard her words. He hugged her gently and lowered his head to kiss away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He whispered, "Manting, I'm talking to my Manting." "Hubby." Shun Manting hugged him and buried her face in his chest. "There's another Manting, isn't there?" Shun Luo was stunned and didn't know how to answer. "Hubby, that Manting isn't me. I'm Manting. Don't like that Manting, okay?" Shun Manting hugged him and looked at him pleadingly. "That Manting wants to hate you. She doesn't want to be with you. She said that you're a bad person. I told her that you're not, but she didn't believe me." Shun Luo fell silent. Chapter 21:35. Shun Manting's eyes were fixed on Shun Luo, and as she spoke, she felt wronged when she saw that he was getting quieter and quieter. She couldn't help but hold Shun Luo tighter and burst into tears. "Why aren't you talking? Do you like Shun Manting more? And don't want me anymore? Shin Manting hugged him with all her strength and cried uncontrollably, Honey, honey, I'm the one who likes you, not that person. Don't like her, okay? Shen Luo, Anne's heart ached when he heard her crying. Her uneasiness and fear were clear to him. Shen Luo and hesitated for a moment and hugged her tightly in his arms. He said softly, Don't be silly. I love Manting, and I always have. Don't cry, or you won't look good. No. Shin Manting was very persistent. She hugged him and shouted, You know it's not me. I'm not her, and she's not me. I know, she hates you, and you also know that she hates you. Why can't you only like me? Her voice was intermittent with a sobbing tone. Every word was poking at Shin Luo Anne's heart. Yes, Shin Manting hated him. Even little Manting knew that. Why was he still so persistent? Perhaps it was because to him, whether it was the original Shin Manting or the 12-year-old Yunsuan, they were the same person. Shin Manting cried even harder when she saw that Shen Luo and did not speak again. She looked up at the man in front of her, and her little face was already red from crying. She looked at the man in front of her and pulled out her hand to hold his face. Shin Manting directly kissed his lips and clumsily and hurriedly kissed him. Shen Luo and did not refuse, nor did he respond. He looked at her calmly, and his heart was a little complicated. Shin Manting burst into tears and said, She hates it when I do this to you. She doesn't want me to do this. Then she put her hand around his neck and said, But I like it so much. I like it when you kiss me. Can you kiss me again and hug me again? Shen Luo and heard her words and pursed his lips. Shin Manting's body trembled, and she sniffed and pretended to cry again. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Looking at him like a child, she said, Hubby, why aren't you talking? Why aren't you answering me? He reached out and gently wiped away the tears on her face. To me, you are Shin Manting, and Shin Manting is you. I can't treat you as two different people. Manting, you're the mother of my child, and you're my wife, he said softly. No, Shin Manting mumbled. She's not your wife. I'm your wife. I love you. She doesn't love you. Don't be fooled. Shin Luo, Anne's heart was pierced once again. Shin Manting sobbed. She grabbed his hand and said, I was the one who put this ring on you. I'll put it on for you again at the wedding next month. As long as you don't want Shin Manting to come back, I can continue to stay by your side. Hubby, I beg you, please love me, okay? Shin Luo and was taken aback. What do you mean? Chapter 21:36. His words were clear and organized. Shin Manting sobbed a little, but she remained calm. She stared into his eyes, as if waiting for his decision. Shin Luo and was still in a daze and found it hard to believe. In other words, it was a choice between two personalities. If he had chosen the original Manting, little Manting would have been obliterated. What if it was the other way around? If he chose young Manting, then the original Manting, would she never be able to come back? However, Shin Manting was still very serious when she said those words. He had always thought that little Manting was innocent and kind. But in the face of such a moment, she could still be so firm and decisive. That's right, in a moment of life and death like this, everyone wanted to survive. This is human nature. Shin Luo and stared at Shin Manting for a long time, then muttered, Must it be like this? Shin Manting saw his hesitation, and tears rolled down her cheeks again. She looked at Shin Luo and said, Hubby, do you like her more? His voice was choked with sobs, filled with confusion and despair. She tugged at Shin Luo and's clothes and sniffed. Why? Honey, why? Little Manting was very puzzled. I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who likes you. You like me too. Why did you choose someone else? Even the door couldn't block out the cries of despair. Yi Qianqian couldn't stand it anymore. She handed Little Moon over to Nanny He and quietly walked to the door of the room to observe what was going on inside. The door was ajar, but it just so happened that it covered the position of the bed. The voice came from the bed. Yi Qianqian stretched out her hand to knock on the door. At that moment, she clearly heard Shen Luo An's voice again. Shen Luo An's voice was a little soft, perhaps because he was quite a distance away from her. He said, I didn't make a choice. To me, Manting is Manting. Manting, be a good girl and don't cry. No. Shin Manting screamed in a hoarse voice. I'm not. Hubby, you know I'm not. Shin Luo and fell silent. Shin Manting's sobbing filled the room. She couldn't stand it any longer. She turned around and picked up her phone to call Shin Julia. Shin Julia seemed to be busy. No one picked up the phone. After thinking for a moment, he knocked on the door and said, Big brother, big sister-in-law. Shin Manting's crying subsided a little. Come in, Shin Luo said. When Yi Qianqian heard that, her hair stood on end. She had been married to Shin Julia for 2 years, and this was her first time entering Shin Luo room. As soon as he walked in, he discovered that Shin Luo's room was very large. When she walked in, she saw Shin Luo sitting on the bed and Shin Manting lying on it. Shin Manting's eyes were red and swollen, and she looked very pitiful. Yi Qianqian's heart ached. At the same time, she was a little afraid. The person in front of her was schizophrenic. What if she took it too hard and stabbed her? I heard that the emotions of mental patients are very unstable. Cough, cough. Yi Qianqian walked over and said sheepishly, Manting, didn't you say that you wanted to take the baby to the amusement park? Little Moon is already urging you to go. Chapter 21:37. Wow, he's quite organized. Yi Qianqian thought to herself. She quickly stepped forward and said, Then you have to apologize to Little Moon. As an adult, you have to set a good example. Shin Manting wiped her face and asked, Are my eyes swollen? Yi Qianqian nodded subconsciously, but immediately shook her head. They're just a little red. Shin Manting got out of bed, put on her slippers, and walked out. Shin Luo's face was gloomy. He looked at Shin Manting's back and said softly, Thank you. It was obvious that he was thanking Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian waved her hand and said, There's no need to thank me. But soon, she thought of something and said softly, You have to take care of Manting's emotions. Don't scare the child with her constant changes. Shin Luo was stunned. He hadn't thought of that. When he heard Yi Qianqian's words, he was deeply convinced. He stood up and was about to go out, but before he could move, he heard Nanny shouting, Manting, what are you doing? Shin Julia's heart skipped a beat. Yi Qianqian was also shocked and quickly ran out. When she went out, Nanny was holding a fruit in one hand and a knife in the other. She looked at them helplessly and stamped her feet anxiously. Go after her. Manting ran away with Little Moon in her arms. Damn it. Yi Qianqian couldn't help but curse. Damn it. That jinx. A black shadow ran quickly beside her. Shin Luo's footsteps were very fast, and he was soon out of the villa. Yi Qianqian quickly ran after him and took out her cell phone to call Shin Julia. Shin Luo quickly ran to the left, and Yi Qianqian ran after him. This time, the call went through. Shin Julia had just finished a consultation and was taking a sip of water. When he saw his cell phone vibrate, he picked it up and said, I was busy just now. What's wrong? Old Shun, go home quickly. Manting ran away with the child. Shin Julia's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? Shin Manting didn't run far with the child in her arms. When he saw Shin Luo and Yi Qianqian run out, Shin Yue Xiao couldn't help but open his eyes wide. He looked up at Shin Manting and asked in a childish voice, Mommy, are we playing hide and seek with Daddy? Shin Manting held the child in her arms and felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. She hugged the baby tightly and said, Yes, when you see Daddy later, don't say anything. Mommy can only take you home after Daddy chooses Mommy. Oh, Shin Yue Xiao didn't really understand. Shin Manting wiped away her tears and crouched through the garden of the villa. She walked out the back door with the baby in her arms. Nanny was still in shock. She quietly hid at the side and watched Shin Manting leave with the baby. She quickly followed after her. She quietly picked up her phone and dialed Shin Luo's number. However, it seemed that Shin Luo didn't bring his cell phone with him, so no one answered. Seeing that Shin Manting was getting further and further away, Nanny panicked and shouted, Little Moon, come back. Shin Manting froze when she heard this. When she turned around and saw Nanny, She quickly picked up Little Moon and ran forward. Seeing this, Nanny hurriedly chased after her and shouted, "Manting, stop running. Where are you going with Little Moon? Come back." The weather in the imperial capital was still a little cold at this time. Manting was only wearing a thin spring skirt, which made her look very thin. A gust of wind blew, and she could only shiver with the baby in her arms. Chapter 21:38. Manting looked back. Nanny's figure was indescribably old. At this moment, she was running behind her at a very slow pace and seemed to be struggling. Manting suddenly felt a little sorry for her and kept looking back. When she saw Nanny following her across the road, she finally couldn't help but shout, "Nanny, you should go back. I'll go back later. I'm just scaring him." When Nanny heard this, she suddenly felt relieved. She looked at her with a helpless expression and shouted, "What's the use of scaring him? Come back quickly. Don't catch a cold later." "I'm happy," Manting shouted with a sob in her voice. "I'm feeling uncomfortable. What's wrong with taking our son out for a walk?" Nanny felt even more helpless when she saw how confident she was. The sun was a little bright. Nanny squinted and covered her eyes with her hand. She shouted, "Stop running. My old arms and legs can't take it. Come back quickly. Young master will be worried if you catch a cold." "No." Manting was very stubborn. She held the baby and pouted. "He doesn't love me." Yueshao saw that his mother was crying and raised his little hand to wipe her eyes. He whispered, "Don't cry, Mommy." Manting felt even more wronged, and her tears flowed even more fiercely. She said, "Baby, if Daddy and Mommy aren't together anymore, will you go with Daddy or Mommy?" Little Moon was a little confused and at the same time a little confused. Why would they not be together anymore? He blinked his big dark eyes and asked, "Mommy, did you quarrel with Daddy?" When Manting heard this, her tears suddenly turned into laughter. "I've learned everything from you. You even know what quarreling means." Little Moon didn't quite understand what Manting meant by crying and laughing at the same time, but it seemed that she was praising him. The little fellow waved her arms happily and looked back with a grin. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he shouted, "Daddy!" Manting was shocked and turned her head. She saw Luo and running in her direction. Manting suddenly panicked. She was like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. She was so scared that she burst into tears. She immediately ran forward with the baby in her arms. But Manting was wearing slippers and didn't even wear socks. His feet slipped from the oversized slippers to the ground, and the sharp pebbles pierced his soles. Manting cried out in pain and shouted, "Don't chase me! Don't chase me!" But why would Luo listen? Luo was 8 meters tall and had long arms and legs. Manting couldn't outrun him in the first place. "Daddy!" Little Moon stretched out his arms to receive his father's embrace when he saw Luo and carrying him. Luo was still in a state of shock. He took his son in his arms and checked him from head to toe. He heaved a sigh of relief when he found that there was nothing wrong with him. When he looked down, he saw Manting hugging her feet and crying bitterly. Her cries were not soft and attracted the gazes of the few pedestrians on the street. Luo had no choice but to squat down and say, "Let me see." Manting cried even more fiercely. She sat on the ground and hugged her feet. She had no intention of responding to him at all. Luo felt a headache coming on. He didn't allow her to argue. He reached out and pried her hand away, then pulled her feet over. She turned the soles of her feet toward herself. The red bloodstains on the soles of her feet were very eye-catching. Chapter 21:39. Even when he said such words, his voice was stiff. Manting cried even louder. She kicked him with her foot and said, "You don't love me anymore. I should have just left with our son. Why did you come out to look for me?" The surrounding wind was a little chilly, and he was worried that his wife and child would catch a cold. But when he heard what his wife said, he suddenly laughed. Manting felt guilty and sobbed a little. She wiped her eyes and said angrily, "What are you laughing at? I'm laughing at how cute my wife is. Shen Luo and reached out and rubbed her head. Then he pulled her up and said, let's go home. My heart will ache if you freeze. The childish Shen Manting needed to be coaxed. This way of getting along was the most appropriate and harmonious way for them to get along. Shen Manting felt that he was back. She sobbed and stood up. She stretched out her arms, waiting for him to hug her. Shen Luo and smiled and lifted her up in his arms. It was a classic princess carry. Shen Manting wrapped her arms around his neck and suddenly burst out laughing. Shen Luo, Anne's heart was filled with tenderness. He looked at the little woman in front of him with a smile and said softly, you're not angry anymore? Oomph. Shen Manting turned her head away, her body trembling as she cried. Nanny, he finally caught up with them. She panted and shouted, young people run fast. Come on, little Ewer, let's go home. Little Moon pouted enviously as he looked at Shen Luo and Shen Manting. He also wanted Daddy to hug him. Nanny, he could read the child's mind at a glance. She chuckled and said, go home first. Beep, beep the sound of the steam whistle. The familiar Porsche stopped beside them. The window of the driver's seat was rolled down, and Shun Juliet's face was revealed. When Shun Juliet saw them, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, get in the car. Don't catch a cold. Shen Luo and had no objections. He carried his wife to the back seat. Nanny, he carried the little fellow into the front passenger seat. She was only a short distance from home. When she got home, Yi Qianqian was pacing back and forth in front of her house. When she saw that Shun Juliet had returned with so many people, she heaved a sigh of relief. After Shun Juliet parked the car, Yi Qianqian immediately went up to him and whispered, did Big Brother tell you? F***CK. You scared me to death. His family's conditions were limited. Shun Juliet could only inquire about Shun Manting's condition in Shen Luo, Anne's relatively clean and spacious room. After understanding the situation, Shun Juliet had a rough idea of the situation. The way he asked the question was very clever. Shen Manting didn't realize that she was being treated as a patient at all. The meeting ended easily. When Shun Juliet walked out, Shen Luo was playing with a new puzzle with his son, the 24 grid map of Huaxia. Shun Juliet glanced at it and said, brother, come to my room for a while. Yi Qianqian heard it too and quickly stood up. I'll go too. Shun Juliet glanced at it and didn't have any objections. He quickly entered the room. Yi Qianqian was the last to enter. She closed the door behind her and waited for Shun Juliet's diagnosis. How is it? Shen Luo asked. This situation is rather rare. Sister-in-law seems to understand Sister Manting's emotions very well, she said as she took out a notebook. Now, there are two of them. Let's call them Big Manting and Little Manting. Shen Luo and Yi Qianqian looked over. Big Manting doesn't seem to know about Little Manting's existence, but Little Manting is the opposite. She can even predict when she will wake up. Chapter 2140. Hearing this, Yi Qianqian and Shen Luo were shocked. At the same time, Shen Luo felt a chill down his spine. Adult Manting didn't know about Little Manting's existence, but Little Manting could predict when Adult Manting would wake up. Moreover, she kept asking Shen Luo to only love her, so as to erase the existence of Adult Manting. Wasn't she only 12 years old? Why would a 12-year-old girl have such thoughts? One couldn't help but feel fear and trepidation. Seeing Shen Luo, Anne's reaction, Shun Juliet seemed to have expected it. He tapped on the notebook with a pen and said slowly, of course, this is just my speculation. Adult Manting might not necessarily not know about Little Manting's existence. But Little Manting's malice towards Adult Manting really exists. Shen Luo said in a low voice, she doesn't want Adult Manting to wake up. In fact, this was understandable. However, Little Manting seemed to be a little different for what he imagined. It shouldn't be like this. Shen Juliet was silent for a moment and then said, brother, you have to take good care of her. Even if she's only 12 years old, the mentality of an orphan still exists. Shen Luo frowned. Shen Juliet looked at him and slowly said, according to incomplete statistics, most orphans are mentally lonely. They are self-abased, selfish, lonely, and yearn for love and care. There's a difference between adult Manting and young Manting. Sister Manting has lived at home for so many years. Compared to Hyunsuin, her state of mind is different. You can't think about Sister Manting's thoughts and focus them on young Manting. Julia looked at Shun Luo and waited for his reaction. Shun Luo and smiled bitterly. She is also Manting. It's not the same, Julia said. With split personalities, each person has their own memories, their own personality, and their own thoughts. But between the main personality and the secondary personality, one will be dominant. Hearing this, Shun Luo and felt a little uneasy. Yi Qianqian had already guessed something and exclaimed, "Do you mean that little Manting is now dominant?" Shun Luo, Anne's heart suddenly sank. Shun Julia was silent for a moment and nodded. Not necessarily, but based on the current situation, it is only a matter of time before she becomes dominant. Shun Luo and had mixed feelings. Brother, Big Manting and Little Manting are both Manting, but Big Manting is the real Manting. After saying that, Shun Julia had no intention of saying anything else. She tugged at Shun Julia's sleeve and asked, "Is there no way to level the playing field?" Shun Julia asked, "Is there no way to level the playing field?" "Yes." Shun Julia looked at Shun Luo and calmly. "Whoever started the trouble needs to end it." When Shun Luo and came out of Shun Julia's room, he saw Nanny. He's sitting on the sofa. She was facing the children's toy room, peeling beans. Chapter 2141. Shun Luo and Shin Manting said and looked up at him. "I just saw the marriage certificate." Shun Luo and paused and looked at her. Shin Manting looked up with an indescribable expression on her face and asked, "Have we registered our marriage?" After a long silence, Shun Luo and replied, "Yes." "Yes." Shin Manting's face was expressionless. She whispered, "What have you done to me in the past 2 years?" "Manting, I didn't. How could I get married to you? How could I sleep with you?" Shin Manting was a little annoyed. She took his hand and walked to the bedside table. She opened the first drawer and took out a row of contraceptive products. "There are 10 in a box. There are only 7 here." Shun Luo and was silent. Shin Manting continued, "This is your house. You can't bring another woman home to spend the night." So, when he used it, he must be using it on her. Unbeknownst to her, he had violated her once again. Thinking of this, Shin Manting felt sad. A sense of resistance and grievance followed. Her eyes were sore and tears welled up again. Shun Luo and couldn't help but reach out and hold her in his arms. He called her name, "Manting." Shin Manting didn't resist. She let him hold her and let her hands fall to her sides. Tears welled up in her eyes. She choked and said, "I don't even know when I married you. You are a beast. If I knew, I wouldn't have married you." Beast. When she scolded him, she also used these 2 words. In the past, his heart would be filled with anger. But 3 years had passed. Shun Luo and felt nothing but bitterness in his heart. "Yes, I am a beast," Shun Luo and admitted. "But you are already married." He hugged her tighter and whispered, "I can't divorce you. For the sake of the child, for the sake of our parents, for the sake of you and me, I can't divorce you. You are my woman in life and my ghost in death." Shin Manting smiled when she heard this. She struggled, but couldn't break free. Shun Luo and made up his mind. He hugged her and said firmly, "We are husband and wife. You can hate me, but the child needs a mother." Shin Manting stopped, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "I need you to." Shun Luo, Anne's heart skipped a beat as he spoke. Nervous and restless. But after he said that, he immediately felt enlightened. When he was questioned by young Manting just now, his wavering mind was resolved at this moment. He held her in his arms and said with certainty, "I want you." Only his sober Shin Manting was the real Shin Manting. Little Manting was just an accident, even though he had done a lot of things to take advantage of others in this accident. But from the beginning to the end, he only regarded her as Shun Manting who had lost her memory. In his eyes, she was still herself. Shenmanting was held so tightly that she could even feel the vibration of his chest as he spoke. As soon as he said those 3 words, his mind seemed to be pierced by a scream. Shenmanting felt a little uncomfortable. She reached out and pushed him, saying, "My head hurts." His heart was in a mess in an instant. Anger, grievance, and discomfort immediately assaulted him. Shenmanting was in a trance. She looked at Shun Luo and in front of her and subconsciously resisted such negative emotions. Chapter 2142. There was an indescribable tension in Shun Luo Anne's voice. Shenmanting could clearly feel it. Her heartbeat was getting heavier and faster. As she watched Shun Luo Anne's back getting further and further away, her heart gradually became empty. When Shun Luo Anne led Shun Julia over, Shenmanting's consciousness was on the verge of collapse. Shun Luo Anne came forward to help her up and said, "Manting, wake up. Don't sleep." As he spoke, he gently patted Shenmanting's cheek and shouted, "Wake up." Shenmanting struggled to lift her eyelids, but it seemed that in the depths of her soul, someone was desperately trying to pull her into the darkness. Behind her was a bottomless abyss. Her vision was getting darker and darker. No, she didn't want to go. She didn't want to sleep. There was an inexplicable feeling, strong and clear. She had slept for a long time, and she couldn't sleep anymore. Shun Luo Anne's voice rang in her ears. Shenmanting tried to struggle and raised her hand, but she quickly dropped it. She clearly wanted to reach out her hand, but she suddenly withdrew it. It was her, but it wasn't her. No. Someone was stopping her from touching Shun Luo Anne. Who was it? Yunsuin, get out of here. A loud shout exploded in her ears like a clap of thunder. Suddenly, Shenmanting felt her heart clench, and in the blink of an eye, she opened her eyes. The feeling of being pulled faded away, and her eyes slowly brightened. Only then did she realize that she was gasping for breath. Shun Luo Anne was holding her, and in front of him were Shun Julia and Yi Qianqian. Shun Julia's face was pale and somewhat solemn. Yi Qianqian, on the other hand, was surprised and worried. She asked nervously, "Sister-in-law, are you okay?" Shenmanting was stunned. When a voice fell into her ears, it seemed that it had taken several turns in her mind before it triggered her reaction. Shenmanting supported her body with her hands and sat up. She looked at Shun Julia and then at Yi Qianqian and shook her head. "I'm fine." The throbbing pain in her head seemed to have subsided, and the pain had dissipated a lot. "Julia." Shenmanting looked up and leaned weakly on Shun Luo. She couldn't sit up straight at all. She looked at Shun Julia and asked, "Whose name were you calling just now?" Shun Julia looked at Shenmanting and asked, "Do you know who I am?" Shenmanting was stunned. "I know. Do you know who's behind you?" Shenmanting subconsciously turned her head when she heard that. When she saw him, she asked, "What the hell are you doing? There's something wrong with your mind. Do you know that?" Shun Julia asked again, "Do you feel strange anywhere? Tell me." Shenmanting vaguely felt something. When she heard this, she was silent for a moment before saying, "Am I a little crazy?" Otherwise, she wouldn't have done so many things with Shun Luo and without her knowing. If he had been sober, she might have accepted it, but she would not have been so happy. In those vague memories and feelings, she was very cooperative most of the time when they were having sex. That wasn't her. "Yeah," Shun Julia replied. "Tell me what you're feeling. Otherwise, you'll be in grave danger." "Is it very dangerous?" Shenmanting raised her eyes. Despite her exhaustion, there was a sharpness in her eyes. "Will I die?" Chapter 2143. Shun Julia's words made Shenmanting feel a little stunned. For a moment, she couldn't understand what he meant. After a while, she said, "Brain death." She couldn't think of any other explanation. But as soon as this thought came to her mind, Shenmanting felt flustered. If she was brain dead, it would be better to die directly. She was no longer in a vegetative state. Her body was still breathing, but there was no soul in it. When Shun Julia heard this, He shook his head gently. It's worse than brain death. There are now two personalities in your body. Do you know that? Shin-Manting was suddenly shocked, and her heart beat faster and heavier. She subconsciously turned to look at Shun Luo and Shin-Manting, trying to find a hint of rebuttal or a joke on their faces. But there was none. Not at all. Yi Qianqian seemed a little sad, while Shun Luo pursed his lips and remained silent. Are you saying that I have a split personality? Shin-Manting looked at Shun Julia and immediately thought of the strange things that had happened in the past 2 days. Sometimes she was clearly aware that she was sleeping, but her body would send clear senses as if she was moving at night. But she thought she was dreaming. Shin-Manting only felt that it was ridiculous, and she laughed, but the uneasiness in her heart grew stronger. Looking at their very serious expressions, she asked, "Did I faint just now?" After being pulled by that huge force, she lost consciousness. It was exactly the same as just now. But at that time, she didn't struggle and directly fainted. She thought it was because she was in poor health. She didn't want to resist, so she let it go. Seeing Shun Julia nod, Shin-Manting felt even more ridiculous. She laughed and said, "Then, I had a dream. In the dream, I ran out with Little Moon. It was very cold outside, and Nanny He chased after me. Then, Shun Luo carried me home. I was very happy." As she spoke, Shin-Manting noticed that Yi Qianqian and Shun Luo's expressions were a little strange. The two of them looked at each other, and Yi Qianqian nodded at her and said, "These things really happened. You weren't dreaming." An unprecedented fear engulfed Shin-Manting. So, she had always been in an unhealthy mental state? Dual personality refers to a person's mental state being greatly stimulated. When this mental state is unable to bear it, under the great pressure, it will form another personality that is opposed to the original personality. Shun Julia enunciated each word clearly. Logically speaking, you've always existed. You should be the primary personality. Shin-Manting was surrounded by fear of the unknown, and her heart was filled with unease. She instinctively held onto his hand. This did not alleviate her fear, but it was better than nothing. However, it's obvious that you haven't been awake for long, or perhaps you don't even know about the existence of another personality. Your position is very dangerous. Her consciousness is stronger than yours, and she wants to be the dominant one. She's slowly invading and occupying you. In other words, Little Manting was killing Big Manting bit by bit. Unlike the naivety she displayed, she selfishly obeyed her instincts. Everyone wanted to live. Even an accidental personality was no exception. Chapter 2144. But such a dream was too real for her now. Just as she was dreaming, with every touch and every word, she could completely feel their appearances. It was true. What they said was true. What should I do? Shin-Manting's voice was choked with fear. Am I really going to die? In the face of death, anyone would be instinctively afraid. Moreover, Shin-Manting's situation seemed to be worse than death. Shun Julia looked at her and said, "There's a way, as long as you cooperate." "What way?" Shin-Manting looked at him. "Do I have to take medicine? Will medicine work in this state?" "Calm down. Don't be nervous." Shun Julia looked at her. "It'll be fine." It was impossible for Shin-Manting not to be nervous. At this moment, she only felt fear and confusion. She's only 12 years old. Shun Julia's voice seemed to be full of magic. The reason why she can threaten your position is because she took the initiative. She sensed the existence of the opposing personality before you, so it's normal for you to be passive. Shin-Manting immediately sat up as if she had grasped a life-saving straw. "What do you mean? From now on, you already know of her existence. Based on your nearly 30 years of experience, is your mental strength weaker than a 12-year-old girl?" "No, obviously not." Shin-Manting's heart calmed down at this moment, and she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. But soon, Shin-Manting smiled bitterly. "She's me, the 12-year-old me, right?" "Yes." "Then her state of mind won't be weak." Shin-Manting looked up. When I was young, I was even stronger than when I grew up. But you've grown up. Shun Julier's words were meaningful. But she hasn't. Shin Manting was stunned. She vaguely seemed to understand what he meant. Shin Manting persisted for a long time. Finally, she couldn't bear the sleepiness and fell asleep. Shin Luo and lay quietly beside her and gently held her in his arms, silently accompanying her. Drowsiness hit him, and Shin Luo closed his eyes. Just as he was falling asleep, the person beside him suddenly moved. Shin Luo immediately opened his eyes. Shin Manting flipped over and naturally lifted her legs to support his body. She buried her head in his arms. Shin Luo's heart softened slightly at her intimate behavior. However, at the same time, he was also clear. Only young Manning would do that. After keeping his eyes open for a while, he couldn't stand it anymore and fell into a deep sleep. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, the person in his arms gently trembled. Shin Luo subconsciously hugged her tightly, then opened his eyes. Suddenly, his eyes met with a pair of pitch-black and bright eyes. Shin Luo was startled by the sudden appearance of such a pair of eyes in the dim light around him. The person in front of him was obviously shocked by him. She said with some grievance, "Hubby." Her weak voice carried the tenderness of a young girl. Shin Luo heaved a sigh of relief. When he came back to his senses, he was already drenched in cold sweat. "When did you wake up?" asked Shin Luo. His voice was a little hoarse, as if he had just woken up. Shin Manting wrapped her arms around his waist and said, "I just woke up. Did I scare you?" "A little." At the same time, Shin Luo felt a little upset in his heart. How could she still look so naive? Caven woke up even later. He looked up a bunch of information. Sleep early, everyone. Chapter 2145. How could she still look so naive? She looked just like little Manting a few days ago. He couldn't help but love her. Little Manting pouted and leaned over. She pecked Shin Luo's lips and said, "Honey, don't you like me anymore?" Shin Luo's heart trembled. Little Manting was still young, but she was very sensitive to the distance between people. Shin Luo tried to relax and said softly, "Why not?" Shin Manting smiled happily. She pouted and said, "Kiss me then." "Little dirty girl, you haven't even brushed your teeth." Shin Luo tapped her nose and then pecked her. "It's still dark. Sleep a little longer." "Well, I won't sleep," Shin Manting said coquettishly and twisted in Shin Luo's arms. "I want to be with you. It's me, not anyone else." While speaking, Shin Manting hugged Shin Luo's arm and rubbed her thighs against it. She whispered, "Honey, I miss you so much." Shin Luo's suppressed desire for a few days was instantly ignited by her gentle teasing. Using his large hands to block her thighs, he pressed his body against hers and pressed her firmly against him. Shin Manting was looking forward to it. Her eyes were shining. She raised her head and kissed him. Her lips fell on his face and made a bo-bo sound. Shin Luo tilted his head slightly and asked in a low voice, "Aren't your relatives still around?" Shin Manting pouted and said, "But I miss you so much." Her look made Shin Luo's body even more hot. He turned over and lay down again. He pressed her thighs to prevent her from moving and whispered, "Sleep well. If you provoke me again, I'll hit you." "You're shameless to hit a woman." "Bah," Shin Manting said in a low voice. Shin Luo didn't stand on ceremony. He slapped her butt and said, "Go to sleep." Shin Manting didn't listen to him. She hugged him and touched his body naughtily. Shin Luo was touched by her. He simply grabbed her hand and pressed it under his body. "If you don't sleep, I'll kick you out." Shin Manting didn't show any signs of repentance. She smiled and said, "Sleep? How can I sleep with you like this?" "But when you did it, I was also sleeping." Although she didn't sleep very well, she would still close her eyes when she was extremely sleepy. Shin Luo he grabbed her hand and restrained her with his thigh. Their bodies were firmly pressed against each other, and Shin Manting couldn't make any more trouble. Shin Manting's eyes gradually darkened as she lay on his chest. Greedily feeling the breath of the man in front of her, little Manting's heart was moved. How blissful! How could such happiness be snatched away by another person? Moreover, this person did not like her husband at all. She had no right to deprive her of everything, even if she was the grown-up version of herself. Shenluo and didn't open his eyes, but he knew that she was awake. Fortunately, she didn't make any strange movements. The night passed peacefully. When Shenluo and woke up, it was already bright outside. The woman in his arms still maintained that position, breathing evenly. Shenluo and gently loosened his grip. As he moved, Shenmanting also opened her eyes at the same time. When she saw Shenluo An's face, she seemed a little startled. Then, she calmed down and said, "Morning." Shenluo and smiled bitterly when he saw her attitude. He could actually recognize who was who between them. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.